ready, Gloria? Okay, having a quorum present, we will begin the October 12th meeting of the Single Family Design Board. Will you call the roll, please?
Woolery? Here. Carroll?
Here.
Geisler?
Here.
Bernstein? Here. Mosel?
Present.
Zink?
Here.
Mayhem?
Yes. Okay, we'll move to public comment. I see no one in the audience, so I'll close public comment and we'll go forward to the approval of the minutes of September 14th and September 28th. Is there a motion for September 14th?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Are there any additions or corrections?
I need to check something real fast.
Okay.
We're doing the 14th?
Yes?
Okay, no comment.
Apparently no comments. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? So ordered. Now we'll move on to September 28th. Is there a motion?
28th, the council meeting?
September 28th was the council.
Oh, that was the meeting that we canceled. We didn't have any.
That was a meeting that we canceled, so we have no minutes for that meeting.
Mr. Chair, can we actually go back to September 14th and reopen that? I did have a comment on one of the items, but I was confused
Okay, we're
which
going to
date.
reopen September 14th minutes.
It had to do, I think, item 6.
Okay.
And speaking from memory, that's why I was flustered when there was 2 dates. It has to do with the project is 1562 La Vista del Oceano Drive. Zarin and Associates.
Yeah.
David Lane was the architect. The comment is under motion item 3. The deck above the garage is not supportable.
Yes.
And I was confused because I don't think we had a problem with the actual deck being there. It was
It
more
was the extension.
it was the extension. So I was thinking that maybe we could, the deck as designed or as something like that, because as is not supported is a much blunter statement.
Yeah, I think we should say that a deck over the garage is acceptable, but not the extended deck, or something like that.
Or maybe acceptable.
How about the expansion of the deck is not supportable?
The expansion of the deck over the garage is not supportable. Can we do something like that, Gloria? Okay, very good, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, and sorry about that.
Okay, then we will re-vote on that. All in favor then with that correction, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered. Okay, then we will go to announcements. We have announcements.
Consent calendars.
Consent calendar. Excuse me, thank you. September 21st.
Let's see, Mr. Chair, we have some catching up to do on the consent calendar. I
Yes,
have
we
4 of
certainly
those
do.
for you. Because we didn't meet 2 weeks ago, so we need to ratify 4 consent calendars. The first one is September 21st, and we had item A, 2224 Gibraltar Road, got final approval with a condition. Item B, 1819 Sycamore Canyon Road, got final approval with conditions. Item C, 937 Roble Lane. Trying to see if that was preliminary or final. I believe that was a final approval with conditions. And item D, 1204 San Miguel Avenue, got a final approval with conditions.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve that as read?
I'll make that motion.
And it's seconded by Bernie. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered. Okay, then we'll go with 28.
Okay, consent for September 28th. We had item A, 333 Conejo Road, was continued to the full board. Item B, 1967 Stanwood Drive, was continued 1 week. Item C, 1565 Franceschi Road, was continued to the staff hearing officer. Item D, 900 Los Alturas Road, got preliminary approval as submitted of the architecture. Item E, 123 Conejo Road, got final approval of the architecture. Item F, 1204 San Miguel Avenue, got final approval as submitted. Item G, 913 Isleta Avenue, got final approval with conditions. Item H, 33 Rubio Road, was continued 1 week. Item I, 914 California Street, got final approval with conditions. Item J, got, 1342 Delagara Road, got final approval as submitted.
Okay, does
Consent on the 28th was reviewed by, we had items C, G, H, I, and J reviewed by Bill Mahan, and items A, D, E, F reviewed by Glenn Deisler, and landscaping for items A, B, and E reviewed by Aaron Carroll.
okay. Are there any comments on those? Let's just move along and get them all, and then we'll do one motion to cover all of them. Let's go on to October 5th. And
Okay. October 5th was another long consent calendar. We had item A, 444 Las Alturas Road, got preliminary approval with conditions. Item B, 860 West Mountain Drive, got preliminary approval as submitted. Item C, 306 Sherman Road, was continued to the staff hearing officer. Item D, 1669 Las Canoas Road, was postponed 1 week. Item E, 333 Conejo Road, that the previous week that was continued to the full board, but the applicant, it was continued to the full board because it was increasing and going above 85%, where the house that burned was below 85%. But the applicant redesigned the house to make it smaller, so it ended up being under 85% as redesigned. So we reviewed it on consent calendar, and it got a preliminary approval of the architecture with conditions. Item F, 462 Conejo Road, got that was final approval of the landscaping. Item G, 1633 Overlook Lane, was also final approval of landscaping. Item H, 33 Rubio Road, got final approval as submitted. Item I, 1027 Alameda Padre Serra, was continued to the staff hearing officer. Item J, 2310 Skyline Way, was postponed 1 week. And consent on October 5th, items A, H, and I were reviewed by Paul's Inc. Items B, C, and E reviewed by Glenn Deisler. And landscaping for items A, B, E, F, G, and I were reviewed by Aaron Carroll.
okay. Any comments on any of those? Okay, let's move on to October 12th then.
Okay, consent today, October 12th. We had item A, 1669 Las Canoas Road, got preliminary approval with the architecture and was continued 1 week for final approval. Item B, 407 Conejo Road, got final approval of the architecture with conditions. Item C, 954 Roble Lane, was postponed 1 week. Item D, 2310 Skyline Way, got final approval with conditions. And the consent calendar today was reviewed by Glenn Deisler.
Okay. Is there a motion then to approve the consent calendar for September 28th, October 5th, and October 12th? Moved and seconded by Aaron. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? So ordered. Thank you, Tony. Do we have any announcements?
Yes, the project at 2105 Anacapa Street was appealed to council last week. Council heard the appeal last Tuesday, and the appeal was denied.
I might add to that City Council struggled a little bit. It was a split vote. I don't think that there was anybody on council that felt that the Single-Family Design Board didn't do what we were supposed to do, but they did have a problem with Planning Commission granting I guess actually first the staff hearing officer, and then it was appealed to the Planning Commission. Using the building that was the part of the original building was in the required front yard, and it was going to be torn down and rebuilt as part of the new architecture. City Council, almost everybody on City Council, I would say, felt that was probably not an appropriate thing to do. So I think in the future, when somebody comes in and with a particular part of a building that is into a required front yard, and they're going to tear it down but build a new thing back on top of that old footprint, we should look at that very, very carefully and make our recommendations very carefully to the staff hearing officer.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Sorry, I made the most senior plan. I do want to clarify that under the current ordinance, non-conforming ordinance,
Yes.
that provision is there.
Yes.
That does allow that to happen. Now, what we can do is in the future look at them more carefully, like Chair Mahan says, to determine if the intent is to maintain the same characteristics of the building. And when you have total redevelopment that occurs, total demolition and reconstruction, there is some ability for us to consider whether those modifications are all supportable or not. That under the current provision, it is allowed.
Right, right. An earlier appeal that was on Stanley Drive, that was a watershed appeal, was mentioned, and this was when somebody wanted to build new into the front yard setback, and the city council did not permit that, and the saying that came out of that particular hearing was, if you can do it some other way, don't do it in the front yard. And I think so I think I'll be asking the board to look at those things very, very carefully in the future. Yes.
This brought up something that I realized when I saw you on TV at the hearing in front of the city council. It seemed that previously when projects were appealed, we had, unless I'm not remembering correctly, but we had one person from the board with one point of view, and if the vote was controversial, which in that case it was, we had another person from the board, and I don't know if it happened that way, and I just was wanting to clarify that.
We talked about that.
Yes, we actually were speaking about this last week, and our policy in the city is to not necessarily prevent a dissenting opinion to come forward at the council. Ideally, we want the person representing the board or board members that show up at the city council to support the decision. They're there to report what the majority of the board determined would be appropriate. Because, again, we're up there with a recommendation saying our board approved this project and we'd like you to support the project. That's typically what happens with an appeal. However, when you do have a mixed vote like this, it's sometimes enlightening for council to understand what the issues were. In some cases, we actually incorporate the dissenting opinions into the minutes also to help embellish the record, to have council understand better what difficult issues are. But that, again, is primarily the person representing the board's responsibility to also share with them what struggles and what issues are appropriate. That doesn't prevent you from coming to the commission or the council's hearing and expressing your views, not only as a board member, but you're also entitled to go there as a member of the public. But you have to identify yourself that you're there as a member of the public to weigh in on under public comment. And then one last thing that I wanted to mention is that years back, the boards did request that we identify pending appeals on agendas, and we've sort of gotten away from that. So I'd like to reintroduce that again to our agendas to have you all understand when these pending appeals are tentatively scheduled at council. So we'll try to incorporate that into future agendas.
Thank you.
It was my understanding that one of the two of you that voted no was going to show up. That's how it came up with Jaime. But it's well, it was Tony did announce it, but maybe you weren't here. I don't know. Anyway, it's a done deal now. Do we have any other announcements? Okay, I don't think we have any subcommittee reports, so we can move on to our discussion item. 2-year review of the Neighborhood Preservation Ordinance update. Heather Baker. Good to see you, Heather. I remember when I saw you every week for 2.5 years.
Right, the NPO Steering Committee, NPO update. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the Single Family Design Board. We have a special topic for you today, which is a 2-year review of the Neighborhood Preservation Ordinance update. And as you know, the original Neighborhood Preservation Ordinance was adopted in 1991, but we had an update to that in 2007, which was just over 2 years ago. May 2007 was the adoption date for council, and then of course your board actually began to function in July of 2007. At the time that the NPO ordinance update was adopted, council asked that we report back to them in a couple of years on how the significant changes that had been voted in at that time were going. And so that's what we're here today, is in preparation for that report back to council. We sent out a draft report to you last week. This isn't meant to be a comprehensive update to the NPO again, but more just a brief review, a check-in type of a process. So the report is broken down to a number of areas, and we'll do the presentation today centered on those. So first, we'll go over the few topics that council specifically asked that we look at. And then in the staff review and after all the interviews that we did with the different single-family design board members, as well as former NPO steering committee members, and let's see, who else have we interviewed? We also met with a number of different neighborhood groups and planning organizations here in town, and the local architects and the realtors. And so took all that different input, and we've covered the topics that were brought up there in this report as well. So out of that, we came up with 9 changes that staff recommends. Now, of course, there was a number of other ideas that were generated through those discussions, which we didn't feel were prudent for implementing at this time. So those are listed in Part 3. I'm not going to go over those in detail, but they're there for reference in case anybody had questions or wants to pick up on those. And then we'll have Jaime going over some appeals data, showing how they've gone down over the years since the SFDB has been implemented and the NPO update began. And then, of course, you'll remember we went on the site visit a few weeks back in September. So we have just the pictures of that, and if you wanted to discuss anything about that. And then last, we have put together some project statistics that were made available today, and that's an insert in the sheet that you received there. So we've got some pie charts so you can see how things have changed distribution-wise by the percent of the maximum floor area with those. So we can go, I think, topic by topic when we get to the proposed changes. But for Part 1, what I'd like to do is leave Part 1 and 3 for discussion till the end and make sure that we at least get through the 9 proposed changes today. We've got a 2-hour segment for this item, and so we'll try to just keep it moving along with the discussion. Okay, so Part 1 was the things that City Council, and are there any questions on what we're doing before I get started? No, okay. All right, so the Part 1 was the council-directed review topics. And one of those was the 20 closest homes database. There was some question, this is a new requirement when the NPO update was implemented, that applicants would submit, and I don't have an example up here on the, actually I do a little bit later screen, but that applicants submit data like this to us, stating, the project's address and its proposed square footage, and then comparing that with the 20 closest homes in their neighborhood. And then there's a ranking that happens too with the FAR rank, and then also by size, which sometimes the rank can be slightly different. And so the idea was that this would give red flags in some cases if the proposed project was at the very top of the ranking, and then that would give the Single Family Design Board an ability to kind of see how far out of the range of the other homes they might be, and if it still might be within the range of appropriateness or not. But without this data, I think it was a little bit more difficult for the Architectural Board of Review to really see where some proposals were fitting in. So there's a couple of examples of these types of data in your report too, and Tony's going to talk a little bit about it in one of the proposed changes as well. So the question that council was asking was, is it reasonable to be asking for this? Some of that data is coming from the assessor's office. Most of it comes from the assessor's office. It hasn't been entirely updated. Some of it might be dated. If applicants want to have the most accurate data, then they're going into our records here at the city. We have seen some people do that. Is this still useful to the Single Family Design Board, knowing that there may be some issues with accuracy? And it's our perception from the staff standpoint that yes, it is still useful information, even though it's not 100% accurate. It's accurate enough to at least give you a feel for what's going on in the neighborhood. You can see the range that's happening there and where the proposed home fits in. So we would report back to council that yes, it's effective enough, it's useful enough to continue to use it during the Single Family Design Board process. And of course, we're interested in your feedback on all these items. So then the second one was the appropriateness of FARs versus guidelines. FARs as guidelines versus standards for single-family homes in multifamily zones. So, for example, if there's a single-family home proposed in an R2 zone, should that then have a standard or just a guideline, FAR maximum? And we felt that at the time that a guideline was more appropriate for those neighborhoods. And as far as staff is aware, that would still be the appropriate way to handle that particular issue is with a guideline. Okay, then the third item council asked us to look at was whether or not we should be including roofed porches or covered decks in the net floor area for FAR calculations. And as Bill was mentioning, we did have quite a few steering committee meetings prior to the ordinance update, and this was one of the topics that was discussed in some detail by the steering committee. At the time, we said no, roofed porches and covered decks should not count as net floor area for FAR calculations. And from staff's perspective, that still does seem to be the appropriate way to go. If we were to start including those items, it would complicate the calculation processes, and then also it would end up probably discouraging some of those items from being included. And we do believe that architectural variety is important for our neighborhoods, and those can be positive aspects to have in a project. So we would recommend keeping it simple, not discouraging those at this time, and just continue with the current counting of those as not floor area as part of applications. Okay, item number 4 is carports and their inclusion in FAR calculations. Carports are included, just like a garage would be included. The reason why we did this was because, again, if you don't count something, it could end up encouraging it. With the carports, traditionally design review boards have found that they aren't as aesthetically appealing as garages. We thought it would just become problematic if they weren't counted at all, that we'd have more proposals with carports, and that wasn't the intent. So those remain those issues still remain, and so we would still recommend that carports continue to be included in the FAR calculations. Okay, and then the last one was private views. This issue, again, during the update process was talked about quite a bit with the steering committee. There was quite a bit of input given to us also through our city attorney's office on this issue, a lot of research about what other communities have done. Was it possible to do these things here? Would it be efficient to do these things here? With addressing private views was all talked about in some detail. But in the end, this topic always seems to have the same conclusion, which legally, practicality-wise, it's really not a city process to be regulating private views. Our purview is more public views. In our last update to the ordinance and the guidelines, we did acknowledge that the Single Family Design Board could look at privacy issues as they impact neighbors, and that it would be okay for neighbors to comment on private view issues, but that it wouldn't be the Single Family Design Board, it wouldn't be your purview to make decisions based on private views. And so our impression is that this has worked to some degree, that neighbors can make comment, and sometimes that does lead to applicants actually changing projects in a way that helps solve problems, but that they're not being required to do so. Of course, sometimes neighbors will continue to still be disappointed if applicants don't voluntarily change their plans. So this seems to be the best balance that we can propose, and we would continue to recommend that that be the process that be used for private views as well. So really, our report back on those 5 topics is pretty much to maintain the status quo with those 5 items. So now I'd like to turn it over to Tony, who is going to talk about 9 items that actually are proposed for changes.
Okay, thanks, Heather.
Mr. Chair, since we do have time and there's no public here to comment, we probably could pause after each of these 9 items and go ahead and have your discussion if you would like, rather than doing it all.
Are we going to be able to comment on these first 5 items too?
Yeah, sure. Would you like to do that now or after?
I think it would be nice to do it now.
Okay.
And then we can move on to the 9 items. So let's go back to item number 1, just which is the 20 closest homes. Did the board have any specific comments on and wisdoms to impart to staff on this particular subject?
Yeah.
Anybody? I have a. I think that it's. I don't know if the. I haven't coordinated this with our existing guidelines because I've been busy with other things, but I think it's really important for the guidelines to clarify that while the 20 closest homes is a reasonable way to look at a smaller neighborhood and how does a specific application fit into the smaller neighborhood, it should be emphasized that there is a larger neighborhood too. And this came up at the City Council hearing last week. The Upper East Side is a larger neighborhood that has very much a character of its own, and the 20 closest homes is important, but also the larger neighborhood is important. So I think it's important for the guidelines to make sure that people are looking beyond just the 20 closest homes to the larger neighborhood, and that's also an important consideration. How about number 2, the appropriateness of FARs?
In multifamily zones.
In multifamily zones. I'm okay with that one. I don't know how anybody else feels about that. I think we've only had a couple of those in our 2 years of experience. The third one, the inclusion of roof porches and covered decks of... How do you feel about this? Anybody?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Gary?
If I could. I see staff's position. I understand staff's position on it, and I do think that it would complicate the process. However, we have seen projects, and there are projects, that these open space areas get enclosed, which is something that really isn't something that when we look at a project, we look at them being enclosed. It really affects the project quite a bit. So I would recommend that perhaps we add some language to it, that we could say that there are future restrictions on enclosed porch areas that will not allow them to enclose them in the future. So I still feel like there should be some language that preserves those open space areas as they stayed in there, that it helps the architecture of having these open spaces, and they don't want to lose those spaces. But if they're enclosed in the future, we're still losing them, and we end up with massing. So in order to preserve that open space, there needs to be language that says that needs to be secured for future.
Paul?
I have one comment too. We did have a project on the same street where you live. You stepped down from it, but we asked the architect to include the underspace under a deck and to make sure that the total build-out wouldn't exceed 100% FAR. And they came back to the next meeting, and they ended up making it smaller because if we approved it the way it was designed, it would have been over 100%, but it was all done on a volunteer basis. So we have to understand it does add bulk and mass, even though it's not calculated. So there should be some way that it should be recognized as a potential hazard.
Glenn, do you have anything on this?
Mr. Chair. Kind of in response to Gary's comment, I think there are methods in place already that the approved plans are still approved. And if there's changes to it, it's either a violation or it has to go through another design review. So I'm not sure what kind of language would be stronger than that. So I'm kind of okay the way it is.
Mr. Chair, if I could add to this discussion, because internally we had some debate about whether we'd support some type of alternative ordinance requirement to limit these type of and to include them into FAR calculations. And I think where we settled on was that if we can incorporate some language in the guidelines that would give the board some ability to say you're providing too many covered areas that potentially could add mass to the building. And you've seen those proposals where people take the long verandas approach and covered walkways and covered decks on upper floors. Rather than put limits, set limits, we could develop some guidelines when we'll talk about a guideline subcommittee later on, and develop some guidelines where you could incorporate when you set some limits, when they exceed those limits, and say, wait a minute, that this is too much of this covered element that is adding to the bulk of a project. So that's just another
That's
recommendation.
another possibility. Denise?
I agree with that, and perhaps that's just limiting the square footage amount that we do accept for anything covered on the outside of the building. I don't know if that's the absolute answer, but just put some kind of square foot limit.
Aaron, do you have anything to add to that?
Actually, I had something on item number 1 that I wanted to ask staff.
Okay.
Why is it that the 20 closest homes data, most applicants use counties records versus cities? It's not as accurate.
It's mainly because it's easier to collect the data that way. The city records, some of our, if we've had recent applications, say someone did an addition relatively recent, we'll have a real good set of plans with real good square footages. It would be better than what they can get from the county assessor, because we use the net square footage and we'd call out basements and first and second floors and covered parking and everything. But if nothing's happened on that property for a long time, a lot of our older plans are very
And
vague.
you're not digitized, are you? The
No.
stuff isn't digitized.
So how much extra work are we talking to get more accurate numbers?
It's a fair bit of extra work. Records and archive staff would have to pull out the archive plans if they're older. If they're newer, they're scanned and they're available online. So it really depends. But it could be a lot of work to go through all our records.
Aaron, we have about 38,000 units in the city, and probably most of them are older rather than younger. So it's a lot. But the assessor does it because that's how they set their taxes. Bernie, do you have anything on loges, covered porches?
And thank you to all the staff. This is a huge amount of work for everybody to do this, and I know we're just really trying to get this very, to meet everybody's needs, so I really appreciate it, and I know we all got it on our email, so we had a chance to quickly look at it. Number 3, I do think that it needs to be tightened up. I'm thinking about some pictures that I've been seeing in some of the home magazines and what people are doing with outdoor decks and porches, and it's almost like a big room. Maybe it's missing one wall, so I think we really need to have some standards. And then, just to clarify, I wondered if somebody could just explain under number 2, in case anybody in the public is confused like I am, guidelines versus standards, and how are we defining those?
The standard is you have to go by it, and the guideline is that you don't have to go by it.
It's suggested.
So, for instance, we have a for over 85%, certain things are required. But I think over 15,000 feet, that becomes a guideline rather than a standard. So they don't have to do it. Isn't that the way that's the way it works?
That's correct.
In other words, what we were trying to do was we were trying to make the 85% threshold of the applicant would have to present a lot more information to the board. But once a house is over 15,000 square feet, and usually then it's on a much bigger piece of property, then it becomes guidelines rather than standards.
Mr. Chair, so in the context of item number 2, so for example, if there was a maximum home size limit that was a standard, then that's in the ordinance. And in order to go beyond that, a planning commission modification would be required. So, but if it's just a guideline as it is now, then it's simply maximum numbers in our single-family design guidelines, not located in the ordinance that that is suggested for those properties. But if they wanted to go over it, they wouldn't have to get the planning commission modification. That's kind of, I think, the crux of it for the multifamily zones.
So getting back to 3, I agree that the covered porches have been a problem for us, and especially when they get closed in. And I know we really talked about this a lot when we were doing this to begin with, and I think now with the experience of 2 years under our belt, my feeling is that covered porches should be counted in some way. Maybe they should be counted as half. In other words, you take the area and you multiply it times 0.5, and you say you've got to add this to your square footage, 50%. And then if you close it in, then it becomes 100%. And so that the impact of that loggia or that porch is recognized in the FAR calculation in some ways. Maybe 50% isn't the right number, but whatever it is, and I think it puts the applicant on notice that these things do have an impact, and we are concerned about them, and the neighborhood is concerned about them. And just to ignore them, I don't think we should ignore them. It's my feeling.
Mr. Chair, I think, again, staff's opinion is that we don't want you to ignore them, and we would like to have some set thresholds in place in your guidelines, similar to the grading triggers, where we don't encourage over a certain amount of grading. While you could say that for covered areas like this, you don't want to see more than 500, 10%.
Yeah, don't put it in square feet. Put it in percentage. Yeah.
And then we would alert the board when that's being proposed. You have, this quantity, which is 10% of floor area being proposed as covered areas. And that way it gives you discretion as to when it's appropriate and it's not appropriate, or where you feel they're stretching to get more outdoor covered areas to increase the mass.
Okay, well, why don't we look? We'll study that a little bit more and
in the guidelines.
Yeah, right. And carports are okay to be counted. I think everybody would agree with that. Private views. What do you have?
I'll go first. The only comment that I had is I'd like to see what the staff is going to be changing for the illustrations. Maybe we haven't done those yet, but it talked about a couple extra pages and managing conflict with comfort. If those are prepared, if I could review them, if they're not yet done, then they're not done.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I'm not clear. Which illustrations?
On page 5, it says the updated SFDG included more tips, illustrations, as well as 5 pages. Are these pages that are already included?
Yes, they're already in these guidelines under the Good Neighbor.
I thought they were additional changes.
Yeah. What I meant when I said the updated was for the 2007 update. So the previous version of the single-family design guidelines that had like the purple-gray cover didn't have the same depth that we now have with the Good Neighbor tips and guidelines.
Okay.
However, we will have opportunity to work on other things, like, for example, the lighting guidelines. We're thinking about if the committee, or if the board would like to work on those. It's part of a subcommittee process. We'll go over that under the proposed changes. So.
Anybody else have any comments on private views? Well, I feel very strongly that we are not stepping up to the plate on this. I know other cities have done some things on private views. We kicked those things around to some degree when we were writing this document, and we were up to our ears in everything. So I think it was okay to put it off. But I don't think it's going to go away. In my opinion, it's the thing that the neighbors are concerned about the most. If we are going to be responding to what the neighbors care about the most, when their views are blocked, this is a really big issue to them. And I think one of the responsibilities of government is to do things that private individuals can't do. That's really a responsibility of government, to do things that private individuals can't do. And when you have a view and the value of your property is based on that view, and then somebody builds in front of you and blocks that view, they transfer value from you to them. And I think that's got to be a consideration for government to be concerned about. There's a lot of people perceive that as unfairness, and I don't think we can just let this go. This is a really important thing to give more consideration to. I realize it's a very nitty problem and very difficult, but I don't think we should just sweep it under the rug when we're reviewing these guidelines, because I think it is an important issue. And I would wave a red flag that we just don't let this thing go. And I'll bet you when we have public comment, which is a couple of Saturdays from now, you're going to get a lot of input about private views, believe me, and you just cannot ignore it. Can't ignore it. So maybe we need to revisit these other communities that have addressed this issue and see how they are coming with their particular take on it. Are they being successful, unsuccessful, or what? I know it's. I see Betty there gnashing her teeth, and I know you guys are overloaded with stuff. But this is I think this is a really important thing to the people.
Yeah, I'll make one comment.
Yeah. Come on up, Betty.
We've had
Microphone and your name.
Thank you, Betty Weiss, City Planner. We have done research and looked at other communities, and we also have experiences here in Santa Barbara where that private interest in property value is actually protected through a civil and private exchange. And so when
but that's mostly for landscaping, though, right?
Well,
not buildings.
People have purchased view easements over other people's property, was what I'm talking about. And so I just wanted to make a note that practice has definitely been in effect in this community and other communities throughout the world, actually. It's a recognized legal mechanism to retain a value of a view over someone else's property. So that is a common practice as well. This particular issue, as I think Heather, the report summarized, really is a significant policy issue, and to go further into examining and protecting private views as a basis for deciding if one person can improve their home one way or the other would be a significant change. And I'm not saying that couldn't happen. I just want everyone to realize, and I think the summary presents that every time that this has come up, the significance of that possible decision has been considered. And I guess our experience, where we'd like to hear from you all, how the guidelines have worked so far in terms of what have the projects where people come and say, this is my view, and you send the applicant away to meet with them and study possible change in windows, decks, massing. That this is more work that we've done in the past 2 years than we did prior. So we're curious too about how the last 2 years have gone.
I think the board has tried very diligently to deal with the problem in terms of lowering ridges, moving second stories from one end of the house. You know, I mean, really major design. I'm thinking of that one up on East Las Tunas. East Las Tunas. You know, we moved a really major change in the plan, and the architect and the owner were very cooperative to really change this whole thing. So we are trying to do that. I think the guidelines, we could use a little more heft in the guidelines to help us continue to you know, when their flexibility is available, but an applicant is resistant, we need to have the muscle to be able to say, you know, we won't be able to make this finding if you guys can't do this. So I think the board could use some help, in the guidelines could help us do this. Yes.
What other things have other cities done besides the one that you mentioned?
I just have experience even involving properties in Santa Barbara where we've seen the view easement practice. But we did look, I can't remember how many different cities, 7 or 8 different cities
Tiburon has
when we
one.
went through the process. And
Palos Verdes has a view ordinance.
And I think there have been more even since that time. There have been some
Maybe
communities.
Laguna Beach has one too now.
Did Scott Vincent give us an update on anything on private views? I wasn't sure. We didn't look into it.
I do have some recent discussions with Scott Vincent, and he believes that our city attorney will continue to recommend to city council to not engage into a private view protection type ordinance based on construction. And I believe he continues to indicate that it's difficult to show the public's interest in protecting private views. And so he's going to continue to recommend against it. So that's just something that you need to be prepared as we move forward.
And from my point of view is if it's been working pretty well and you have been successful, this isn't necessarily a time to be ramping up additional considerations and reviews by this board. We want to focus and have your reviews be effective and timely, and I would just be concerned if this became a place to arbitrate private views. That could really change the effort, and this might not be a good time to be doing that as well. But again, examples of where you've done that effectively and where you've been challenged, I think probably it's on the smaller lots where going up a second story is going to affect privacy perhaps more than private views.
When the lot's really small, we don't have too many options available. But there was also that one on...
But we deal with privacy. I mean, privacy is a right, is a little bit more established than a right to a private view, and we grapple with that quite a bit. So I think we should have those considerations in balance, and the city resources stepping into this area it will remain a concern from city management and attorneys.
Gary?
I believe that there's other things that are involved here. You can't necessarily give the rights of another property owner because they have a view to because one property owner may have a view and take the property owner's rights away from them in order to upgrade their property. They also are losing value if they are not able to upgrade their property because they can't do it because the neighbor above them feels like they own that view. And that view isn't necessarily their ownership. You know, they own the land that they have, and so does the people below them own the land that they have, and they have a right to upgrade and build on that per our guidelines. And I don't think that by giving one person more rights over the other is a fair and equitable way to do things.
I feel that I mean, I don't disagree with you on that, but I do feel that this is a really big issue with the public and with the neighborhoods, and I don't see how we're going to avoid talking about it at our public thing.
Mr. Chair, I'd suggest we continue the dialogue and mention to council when we go up to council that it's still an issue that it comes up, and it's not always resolved at this board. And I think that's an honest assessment.
Mr. Chair, one thing, if I can add, what I do like about what our board does is we acknowledge that we do not protect private views, but we acknowledge that the views existed, and so we want to acknowledge the obstruction that's being created by the new construction. And the examples that we have is when you obliterate 50% or 80% of someone's view, we get concerned. But when we can rearrange the architecture and the massing and not obliterate as much, then we acknowledge that we're allowing one person to build up, and we are acknowledging that they had a view that is being partially maintained, but we're not protecting 100% of the view. But we do have a dialogue, and that's what's happening at the board.
Yeah.
I think we've been pretty successful at that myself. I know it's always coming up. But the Shelton job that we saw, that was a really good example of having that work for everybody, even though we still had some... We hammered
on that and hammered
on
it.
We hammered that one to death. But we did care, and we let them know, and they put in the correction. And I think that it's not always going to work, probably because we don't have that much heft, like you said, behind us. But we've done a pretty good job of it.
Yeah. I think that I don't know if we could put this in the guidelines or not, but it's some verbiage that would say, when the board recognizes that there's flexibility in the design that would permit a partial view to be maintained, they are going to struggle to make that happen. If it's not flexible, because we can see there's just no other way to do it, then we're getting pretty smart at being able to analyze these kind of things. And one of the things would be, if when the person goes over 85%, the flexibility starts to go down because they're putting on a lot more stuff. And maybe this is a part of the above 85% thing. We're going to look at that much tougher. For instance, maybe loges and covered porches are not appropriate. There are lots of ways we can look at this, and
appropriate for blocking view.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, thank you. Now let's go on with your with the 9 changes.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I've just made a suggestion to Tony that we actually start with item 9 on the list, because I felt like it would give us a context for the rest of the discussion as we go forward.
So you want to go backwards on this?
Yeah, we'll start with number 9 and go back to number 1, if that's okay, just in this instance.
So number 9's me, and the good news here about the city's economy and budget. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm sorry. Mr. Chair, do we have public comment at all? Or you can present it first? Okay.
I know that staff has been working on this evaluation for a little while, and as things have become more constrained in terms of the city's general fund and staff resources and processes are being looked at to deal with less staff resources and how we handle our process, I asked that we look at possible changes that could reduce the cost of city resources to support the SFDB if appropriate. I do want to tell you that I've been conveying that my general sentiment on this 2-year review is that this process is working very well. I think this board is doing a great job, and I hope you hear that. I've been saying that a lot lately, and I hope other people tell you that. In general, I find that to be true, but in particular with the challenges we've had with the T-Fire rebuilds as well. So we didn't really come up with a specific set of changes just yet to discuss with you. I've been talking with Jaime. We had a City Council, Joint Planning Commission City Council meeting last week or so, where we're going to get together with different board and commission representatives and get some brainstorming and buy-in as to how the planning division and all our boards and commissions might change the way we do things, because I think we really do need to change the way we do things for the next couple of years, and we're already starting to change. So I just put number 9 in as a advisory, I think that some of the commented changes help towards efficiency, but they weren't really done specifically for this budget challenge. They were just done based largely on what staff and your experience has been. So I think we will need to have some additional discussions in the not too distant future.
Mm-hmm.
And again, today, if anything comes up related to this and people are concerned about the budget implications, that is a real consideration I'd just like you to be aware of.
Well, Jaime and I were talking about this last week, and we were thinking that there might be ways where we can tighten up the what goes to the consent calendar. Mm-hmm. And I think the consent calendar is pretty successful, and we may have to beef up the resources for consent as the consent calendar gets longer. It may be that we have to have two people doing it, and instead of one, and that might be more appropriate. Of course, it does take two staff people then instead of one, but on the other hand, consent does speed things up as opposed to bringing them to the full board.
Mr. Chair, as you recall, I also mentioned that we may have to also look at not looking at everything in the city. We did take on more projects 2 years ago. We expanded some of the purview to include all second stories. Mm-hmm. So that, again, makes the process a little slower because you're dealing with more projects. And I suggested even looking at projects that aren't publicly visible, that are happening in someone's backyard. Maybe that's, we need to define what type of projects would be either approved with some type of administrative standards in place to match architecture and so forth. So we're going to come back to you with that type of proposal to see if that could help in lowering the quantity of agenda items.
And I think your statistics that you'll be presenting at some point also, again, it's primarily a very positive report card. And so we don't want to tinker with it in some way that would diminish the whole purpose. But I think there is some room at all levels. And I agree with the chair that when things are happening more quickly at the consent calendar, that helps the process overall. The longer that applicants are, or the shorter time period that applicants are in the process as a whole, reduces everyone's time and cost. And we may be able to do that at all levels, full board, consent, and administrative reviews, and just look at how we can become, meet the primary purposes and objectives of all of these planning policies, the NPO in particular, but do it differently with less. That's going to be necessary.
More for less.
Less for less. I mean, actually, I do think we'll have to do less. That's the thing that's hard to grapple with, but
I think that the good response that I've gotten, and believe me, I've gotten a lot of good responses from people that I don't know, that have walked up in the grocery store and every place, that parking lot and stuff, and they say they watch. I'm amazed at how many people watch this program. And watch it faithfully. It's like Days of Our Lives, they watch this faithfully, and they're especially, once again, they're especially appreciative of how we take the people in the neighborhood into account, and the neighbors get to speak. They really think that's important, and that even sometimes we make our decisions and it's not what the neighbors would like. But we've listened to them, and we've treated them politely and appropriately, and that's greatly appreciated. So my hat's off to all of you people, and to staff too. Thank you, Betty.
Okay, so just wanted to give a little bit of context as we go into the other changes, so that instead of just thinking, oh yeah, wouldn't that be great, wouldn't that be nice in every circumstance, that we're also balancing how much more staff time, how much more SFDB time would any particular changes take. So the first change is regarding noticing, and Tony Bauman will present that.
All right,
First change?
We're on part 2.
Yes, page
The proposed
10.
changes. And these are ideas that staff's going to put forward as changes or improvements to the process. And these come based on, as Heather mentioned, talking to neighborhood groups, architects, realtors, and I've asked you SFDB members for your input, and they're also they come from staff. You know, since the SFDB's been around, I've been keeping notes in a document as issues come up that I think we might want to take another look at. And, you know, it comes from working with other staff and working with people at the counter and taking applications all the way through the design review process. So these are some ideas we've come up with. And the first one is eliminate noticing for additions of less than 150 square feet to existing second stories. And just from experience, we've seen that these kinds of small additions to already existing second stories don't seem to generate any neighbor interest. And it just, you know, causes more complication to the process and takes longer to do the noticing. So it's kind of a minor change. And I'll just go through all the changes.
Okay.
Okay, so on to proposed change 2. Reduce hand-delivered noticing to the closest 10 lots rather than the 20 closest. And this is something that would really reduce staff time. We have to use limited geographic information software to create a map that shows which are the 20 closest lots to a project site. Mm-hmm. And not many staff members have the ability to do that. And we've also seen that, well, as you've seen here at the meetings, that most interested neighbors are the adjacent neighbors, not the neighbors who are farther away from a project. And it just seemed to us that really...
So this would be this would be over the 85%.
This is for the hand-delivered noticing.
Oh, the hand-delivered note. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Every time we do a notice for an SFDB project, we require that applicants, you know, in addition to putting the yellow sign up at the front of the site, and the city mails notices to property owners wherever they, you know, the property owners might have addresses outside of Santa Barbara, so they get one in the mail. But we also require that the applicants walk around and hand deliver notices to the 20 closest residents.
And you designate who those people will be.
We tell them which are the 20 closest lots. And I think the idea of the hand-delivered noticing has been working very well in getting people talking to each other, getting neighbors face-to-face before they show up here at the meeting. Mm-hmm. Usually neighbors have had a conversation about the project and know what the issues are, so they're not blindsided by comments here at our meetings. And that seemed to work very well, but again, it really is most important for the adjacent neighbors. And the 10 closest lots would cover all those. If you think of like a grid, a square grid with a 3x3, like a 9-square grid with the project site in the middle, well, you'd have 8 or 9 surrounding that. So 10 in most instances would catch everybody who's adjacent in almost every case.
You want our comments as we go along, or you want to hold them and then we'll...
Well,
Questions are okay, I think.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, how does the city follow up with the person who's doing the project? Is there a sheet that the neighbors sign, or do you just take their word for it, or...
when they make the application to us, we give them instructions on this hand-delivered noticing requirement and instructions on posting the sign. And one of the forms that we collect from the applicant is an affidavit that they sign. It has a checkbox that says, I will post the sign, and another checkbox that says, I will hand deliver to the 20 closest neighbors. So we get a signed affidavit from them. That's really how we do that.
Mr. Chair, this suggests a good idea. These topics are broken up by headings. These first two are based on noticing. So it would be possibly a good thing to do is to break after each and understand whether or not, or ask the board if they support both proposals.
Okay, so do we have any comments on these two items?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I would like to comment that I think that the hand delivering of noticing, I mean, just from my limited experience, it does give the opportunity for the neighbors or the applicant, the architect, to talk to neighbors that are close by. But going to 20 homes and delivering the notices to 20 homes, I think that most of the time there are people that are not at home, and you have to drop off a notice, and also there are people that are quite a bit outside of it that really
Don't care.
they don't care. They're asking, why are you asking me this? That house is so far away from me. So maybe 10 is the right number. Maybe the 20 is a. I don't think that the noticing, the 20, but the hand delivered noticing, I can see that being reduced.
And Mr. Chair, another reason, getting back to the map issue and having to create a map, we also think that even without a map, that we could allow the applicants to figure out which are the 10 closest quite easily, and we wouldn't need to tell them which are the 10. We would just let them figure out the 10 closest themselves. Whereas when you go out to 20, it gets a little more difficult to figure out which one's the 18th farthest away versus the 20th. You really need a geographic information system to do it when it gets to be complicated like that.
We used to do it by a radius or something, didn't we? Within 300 feet or 100.
Mr. Chair, this is an addition to the regular mail noticing.
I see.
So this is an additional noticing requirement that actually council placed on at the last review of an NPO ordinance. They actually suggested that we also do this closest homes hand delivery notice. So this is the idea behind this, is to contact neighbors that aren't necessarily property owners. Because sometimes we have absentee property owners that don't live in the homes, and this would be a way for neighbors that don't own the property also be aware of development.
I think 10's enough.
And how about the first item for reducing noticing?
I think that's all right, as long as you've got a statement in there to say, materials, details, and colors to match existing.
This is just noticing, not the review process.
No, we're talking about this 150 square foot.
This would be the noticing requirement, and we actually had a couple of architects and property owners upset about the noticing provision, saying, why do I need to notice my neighbors if I'm just enclosing 80 square feet on my second story? It seemed excessive. That there still would be a design review element on some of these projects.
I see, okay.
Would that include the 300 homes? That would be zero noticing that.
That's correct. Unless there's some kind of zoning modification that might trigger
Unless
an
there's a
additional.
zoning modification, setback issues, those
That
type
would
of
still
things.
maintain a noticing requirement.
Yep.
Privacy issues now?
We would just check it.
The board would still review a project of that nature. The board would.
Okay.
Unless you're willing to give staff administrative approval on these. And that might
You mean
be
for
possible.
150 square feet?
Second story. We might be coming back with that proposal.
Yeah. I think that's a possibility if you want to simplify the process. That's a 10 by 15.
Okay,
Yeah.
so moving on to design review triggers. We have two proposed changes to design review triggers. One is to clarify the trigger for roof alterations in the Hillside Design District to specify a new roof area or alterations to existing roofs that increase height or volume. And we've just seen that being a confusion at the counter, because the way the trigger's written, it just says an alteration to a roof in the Hillside Design District, and people say, well, this is not an alteration to a roof, it's a whole new roof. And our intention was to catch those. So we're just making it explicit in writing so that there's no confusion that we do intend to review new roofs as well as alterations to roofs.
Well, when you talk about a new roof, are you talking about this surface material of the roof, or are you talking about the volume, shape, size?
Both.
Both.
Because re-roofing is also it's a different trigger, but a
That's
re-roof,
re-roofing.
changing out the material is also a trigger for design review. So an addition would automatically mean it has a new roof. So that would be a trigger. That's just a clarification for implementation at the counter, really. The next one, proposed change 4, is change the trigger for design review for walls, fences, or gates in front yards from 6 feet to 3.5 feet. And we have some examples, some photographs of examples of walls in the front yard. And the 6-foot trigger, for fences in the front yard was really to bring in for design review projects that proposed to put tall fences in the front for privacy. The zoning ordinance has limited fences at the front of the property to 3.5 feet, and that has a reason of visibility for traffic safety and pedestrians and people pulling out of driveways, but also to maintain an open feeling in the neighborhoods so that people can walk down the street and see the houses, and people in the houses can see people out on the street. So it's really to maintain an openness.
Mr. Chair, there's actually been a series of projects that have been designed to 5'11" to avoid design review, which doesn't achieve what we wanted to achieve, which is try to prevent these enclosures from occurring.
Yeah.
So we're thinking that the 6-foot trigger really people designed to 5'11".
Sure they
It really
do.
just accomplishes the same thing. So the point is, how low do we lower it without gaining a lot more of these fences? We don't want to see every fence, but we do want to try to regulate this from
That
happening.
kind of stuff.
So that's one of these ones where we're trying to settle on a dimension that would prevent it, and do possibly quick administrative approvals if we know they're not attempting to do this.
And you're going for 42 inches.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And the reason we're going with 3.5 feet is that coincides with when a fence needs a building permit. We obviously wouldn't want to do design review on a 3.5-foot fence when it doesn't need a building permit either. The 3.5-foot number also comes into play with regard to where you can place a fence. There's restrictions where a 3.5-foot limit applies alongside the driveway and at the front lot line. So we chose to take it all the way down to 3.5 feet to be consistent with those other fence regulations.
Yep.
So am I reading this correctly, that then for a 3.5-foot high fence or wall, it will now require a building permit?
One greater than 3.5.
Over a fence over and a
42.25 inches required.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Anything over that.
Anything over that, but up to that, you're not required to have a permit.
Right.
So
It's
because the way
exempt.
number 1 under that reads, it says it aligns the trigger for design review with the requirement for a building permit. So I'm,
meaning if you need a building permit, you would also need design review. And if you didn't need a building permit, you won't need design review.
okay. I see. Thank you.
Right.
Mr. Chair.
Right. Yes.
I would like staff to double check the requirement with the building department. If you keep throwing that in there, from my experience, the building department measures their fence from the bottom of the footing and not from grade. And architects like to have like 8 inches of dirt on top of the footing so we can plant things on it. So we end up getting these 4-foot or even taller walls that require a building permit. So watch that phrasing. Is my only.
No, it should be measured from grade.
That's when we're dealing with walls or retaining walls. They do measure bottom footing for retention purposes.
For retention purposes,
So
but not a normal.
not above grade.
Okay, not a privacy wall. Okay.
We were really trying to get to separating out 2 different kinds of front fences. One is just the little 3.5-foot fence that marks your property line, and the other is a 6-foot fence or 5'11", same thing that acts as more of a barrier and provides privacy. So the intention is to bring the privacy walls in for design review without people circumventing that by proposing something just under the trigger limit.
I think these taller walls, the 6-foot, 5-foot, 11-foot walls, they come in where there's a sound problem, and that's when people. I know we had a issue along Alomar. Remember that? And very much a desire to build a higher wall, which I think we let them do 10 feet back from the property line or something like that. And that's about what this picture here on page 11 looks like. It's about 10 feet back from the property line.
So, Mr. Chair, would you like me to present the rest of the photos that are in the report?
Sure.
Just run through some of the ways that this could come
why
up.
don't you run through them?
So this is obviously a series of walls that obliterates the front view of the building. And one of the issues with this, with a planning perspective, is that it's much friendlier from a street perspective to be able to see the front entry. And then also, if you're going through the trouble of making sure these buildings have appropriate design, but then they're covered with these fences, you're losing that aesthetic value in the neighborhood. So here's another example. Some of them might not be a problem. This is a taller than 3.5 feet, obviously, but yet it's just a driveway type entry in a larger lot style neighborhood. So all triggers are not created perfectly. You do, end up triggering things that maybe we didn't necessarily need to look at, but perhaps the design of this would have been ensured with the landscaping and so forth by having the trigger that it would look as nice as this for an entry wall. Here's another one again where you can't see the front entry, you can't see any windows. Having eyes on the street with windows from habitable living spaces also makes for safer neighborhoods, which is an important planning principle. Here's one where you just can't see anything in the front. It's not the best picture though. And then up on the Riviera, it also can become an issue where public views are being blocked with fences as well that are going along the front property line. Mm-hmm. So, and I just also did want to add that significantly, this is one, I think of all of the changes, this is the one that would actually create more work for staff. We felt that the design issue was strong enough that it was actually worthwhile to actually propose a little bit more work in this one particular area. So, that's it. Do you want to go ahead and comment on this one since we're at the end of this group? Is the SFDB in support of this item? And then we can move on to the next topic.
Aaron?
Can I comment on it? Yeah, I think the reduction of the wall is great. I just would like to know now that hedges are not being enforced. Is that the understanding? Mm-hmm. What do we? So that's just going to encourage property owners to plant high hedges, I think.
Well, the ordinance is still in effect. It's just the enforcement that's not occurring. So, for example, if we have plans come in on a landscape plan specifies an 8-foot tall hedge, right next to the property line, then we would correct those plans. That the landscape plan shouldn't be proposed inconsistent with the ordinance, but if it happens to then grow higher later, currently there's a suspension on the hedge enforcement. The hedges that cause traffic safety issues that are near corners or right adjacent to driveways could still be enforced upon currently. So, and then I'm not sure if you want to comment some more, Jaime, on that one.
Bamboo.
We are enforcing on bamboo.
Yeah. Isn't it possible to pick a species that stays, in the 3 to 4 foot height range, so that obviously some of these hedges, the species that you pick, they go 10 or 15 feet high, then you know that the owners are going to let them grow up if they want to. Or somebody may.
There's a few, I would say, but the majority will get over 8 feet, I would say, if you unmaintained. And that's a question of, do we want to limit, an owner's plant choice? I don't like to limit people if it's an appropriate choice.
Well, I think the board. There's health, safety, and welfare issue that's weighs heavily on the board. If we feel like a specific place, there's going to be a traffic problem, there's going to be danger, I think then there's a real good reason to limit the species. Maybe in other instances it isn't so important. Yes.
I think that in lieu of limiting the species, because there are few choices already for hedge material, you have to limit the height. You just put the height limitation on it and say it must be pruned to 3.5 feet or 4 feet and max.
Yeah, but when there's no enforcement, you don't. What?
Well,
that's like.
I don't know what to say about that. Then
that's like there's marijuana stores.
Yeah.
I have a headache. I think I'm going to have to go. Anyway, no enforcement is. I think we have to think in terms of enforcement. Enforcement is another issue that is a budget issue, and the city has gone beyond its limits. So there is enforcement by design, and we have to. This incumbent upon this board to give that consideration when possible.
This board has placed limits on hedge material on firm property lines in the past, so you do have that ability under your discretion.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I think the 3 foot 3'5" height limit is a good thing. The front yards in houses are part of public views. They're part of the public domain. It's what makes a community feel so much larger. And when we enclose all of these in the front yard setbacks, it really is a detriment to the overall neighborhood. And I think that this is something that really should be enforced in the city, that just blocking off your whole, you go down to some places in San Marcana area where they have nice neighborhoods and they have got some large walls that are encroaching in the front yard to get some more private outdoor living space. And I just think that that's at a deficit to the public. So I think this is a good direction to go.
I agree with that 100%. The front yards are a public asset as well as private property.
Mr. Chair, so I can be clear, so you're speaking of anything that is within the front yard setback, correct? Or all?
Well, the front yard setback. 20 feet, 25, 35, depending on what the zone is.
Yeah, from the edge of street or center line, whatever.
Side yards and backyards are more private, and front yards are more a part of the neighborhood openness.
Well, this
That came out very clearly, going back to this Stanley Drive modification a few years ago, that City Council supported the concept that the front yards are part of the public. Yeah. Well, I don't remember just exactly how they said it, but this is, it's part of what the public enjoy in the neighborhood as well as the property owners, and it needs to be shared with the public. So it's the same thing as, for instance, this, where you walk along and normally when you get between the houses there's a view. Remember this one on Shoreline where we had a concern that the views were being blocked between the houses of the ocean and the islands, and we said no, that's public views between the houses. And so something like this particular picture here is blocking that public view as people walk. This is on Arbolada, I believe. And as people, and when we were doing the Arbolada project, people testified that they walked up and down that street and they enjoyed the public view of the ocean between the houses, and that's something we want to struggle to maintain.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I may, I think this has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis.
Sure.
Because I lived in a home on Alamar. I think I told you before that was a corner lot, and the way the restrictions were on that it was supposed to be 50 feet back. I couldn't put up a fence or anything to protect my children from what was a fairly busy intersection because the current ordinance said, you had to go back 50 feet from the corner, which was a line straight through my living room. So I had to get a mod, and I did, and I put up a fence because there were crackheads and everything else around there, and I had 2 little children. So, I mean, what do you do? It's only a 6-foot high fence.
This is for visibility on a corner? The 50 foot, is that
well, yeah, it's
on each side? Is that still in force?
So I got a mod, and I reduced the corridor, but,
There still is some discretion for the board to make a decision on any type of fence proposal, wall enclosure proposal. So this is just the design review trigger to get into the door to have us look at it.
Yeah, it does have to be done case by case. Okay.
So it sounds like there's support for this item,
Yes.
Mr. Chair. Okay. Number 5?
Okay, so the next category of proposed changes refers to administrative approvals. And we would like to put forth the idea that staff could review and approve retaining walls. Currently, staff can review and approve walls as long as they're not taller than 4 feet, but we're not given purview over a retaining wall. So in some cases a wall is partially retaining, And we see a lot of these come in that are very minor or, set pretty well into a big lot up in the hillsides. And we would like to be able to just review those as staff rather than have to bring them to consent calendar. So this is another minor change, just to kind of simplify our process.
I think that the thing that comes to my mind very quickly is the material of the retaining wall, and that it's compatible with the neighborhood. A couple of weeks ago, we were looking at one up on Roble Lane, where a stone wall was was proposing to remove it, and the board said, no, this Roble Lane has all these stone walls, and we don't want to take away a stone wall. We don't want a concrete block wall or whatever. We want to keep so the neighborhood compatibility with the material is important. Now, I don't know how the staff.
Mr. Chair, what I'd like to comment to you on is that we made great efforts in adding a lot of guideline language on retaining walls in our new guidelines. So I think we have like 5 pages just on retaining walls and appropriate way to not only design them to avoid the heights, but also the materials that would be compatible with neighborhoods. So I think staff has a pretty good idea on the type expectations, having seen a lot of these walls. So I think we can build in some administrative standards for approval, and when we see materials that weren't acceptable, we refer them to consent or for the board to review.
Okay, good.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Bernie?
Go ahead, Bernie.
I was just wondering, when the staff looks at these, do they either visit the site or do they have photographs of the site? I'm thinking of the shoreline area and the bluffs and the retaining walls all up and down there.
It's a standard requirement to have photographs, and it's a difficult decision sometimes to when you have the time to go do a site visit. But again, normally if it's a standard type of approval, we like the materials and we think it's compatible, we think it's a very easy process. It's the difficult ones that we struggle with, and that's an indicator that maybe we shouldn't be doing an administrative approval without having either that site visit or the referral to the board. So we don't do it all at all locations or all proposals.
Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions, and one would be, is there a lineal footage trigger that would, if there's an excessive amount, or is there a trigger if there's excessive terracing of short walls or grading, how much grading is done? And sometimes, when someone wants to they want to reduce those walls, and there could be an excessive amount of work, yet they're under that limit of height.
Well, as far as what staff's given purview to review when we're talking about walls, they have to be less than 4 feet tall, less than 50 cubic yards of grading. They have to have similar character with other walls visible in the neighborhood from public viewing locations. Hillside design district walls have to meet all the guidelines regarding blending in with natural surroundings. And lot line walls, the wall height, length, and use of materials shall be compatible with the neighborhood. So those are the criteria that have to be met for staff to approve a wall. And we think that if they meet these criteria, if the wall is retaining, we should still be allowed to approve it as staff.
But there's no criteria for length.
Cap on it?
There's no criteria for length.
We could put a cap of 100 lineal feet.
I think a certain length.
Something like
then
that.
100 or multi-tiered, I think.
No multi-tiered. When there's multi-tiered, not to approve those.
Yeah, when it's multi-tiered, it should be go through a review process.
And length. It gives consideration to length.
Look at those.
Okay, good.
And related to walls, another question that we wanted to ask you today, but it didn't make it into this document, is the idea of staff being able to approve chain link fences in some applications. Sometimes we see them proposed on large lots, and the idea is to use black chain link so it becomes invisible. And we would like for staff to be able to review those kinds of projects and approve them.
Yes.
Start?
Denise?
I think that would be a good idea. I mean, on large properties like acres, that's very commonly done, because they maintain their privacy, and then they intend, of course, to plant it out. But I think that is what needs to really be looked at. Then is it going to be just bare chain link, or is there a requirement to plant that out so that it looks it's covered up? Because I think that's important for the board to look at in that sense. I don't know if you're just saying you would approve the chain link and then what? Would any planting, you wouldn't require planting?
If we look at Tony could read the entire section of what were limits there were on fencing, but I think the intent was the concern that a considerable amount of fencing could have an impact on a hillside lot, very visible hillside lot. What we're looking for is the more urban type of locations where you do have larger lots that people want to put chain link fence, and we feel black chain link fence is maybe a standard for that location or that neighborhood. And we see most of the time these projects go on consent calendar and get approved without necessarily landscaping. So the idea is, why are we putting these into our process if we can get them quickly checked and approved and out and get permits issued? So I agree there might be some limits on the amount of chain link fencing we could approve. Maybe that could be another criteria of when you go over a mile, half a mile limit. I don't know, whatever that limit would be, where it is a significant amount of chain link.
For me, it doesn't matter how much there is, as long as you don't have to see it. But that's, I think, more important than... I think they go hand in hand. I don't know how to separate that, as far as taking it out of our hands, because any chain link fence that I would ever say, yeah, fine, I would also be requiring landscaping to cover it. So
then you're talking about irrigation too.
Right.
It's my experience that there have only been certain types of applications that we've required landscaping on, and it's not a standard per se that we require it. So it's really a judgment of the board sometimes to trigger it based on the visibility or even a neighbor complaining about it, that they don't want to see it.
Sure.
And there's been a concession to plant it out. If it's in landscaping involved, typically we don't get involved with approvals of that type. We would refer it to consent calendar. So the question, I guess, is would you trust staff to make those decisions? If not, we can keep it on the consent calendar type.
Mr. Chair, can I weigh
Gary.
in a little bit on this?
Sure.
There's one problem with it, is that chain link fence in front of every house is not necessarily compatible with the neighborhood. And that's a decision that needs to be made before a design review board, because it may need to be a wood fence, it may need to be a picket fence, it may need to be an iron fence. And just giving a carte blanche to saying that black chain link fence are okie dokie with us does not necessarily sit well with me.
I think definitely not in the front yard.
Yeah, I think we were talking the interior, rear type of applications.
Is that in the...
We can certainly make it.
Yeah,
Anything that would make it easier for us to approve these.
Yeah.
Because why don't you read the restriction right now, Tony?
I was thinking maybe if we specify something like it shouldn't be publicly visible. I think that's what we had in mind when we were thinking that staff
Not
could be given the
publicly visible.
purview over it.
And it's not over 6 feet high. 8-foot high chain link fence is formidable. With razor wire.
8 is allowed, but typically we see 6 feet as a standard. That, if you see 8 feet, we wouldn't approve it if you feel uncomfortable with that. We can limit to 6.
6 feet. Yeah. I have one thing I don't know how the rest of you feel about this, but personally, I feel that galvanized chain link fence disappears more than black fence.
Really?
Yeah, black fence to me is much more gray. Blends in more with nature than black does. I've never felt that black chain link fence it disappears. That's not, in my estimation, that's not a true statement. Maybe black is neat and cool or whatever, but it certainly doesn't necessarily blend in. I bet if we take pictures of gray chain link fence as opposed to black, it'll show that black stands out more.
Depends on the landscaping around it.
I think the whole
If you're on a
point.
dry hillside, then yeah, it's visible.
How about rusty chicken wire?
Rusty chicken wire. Well, yeah.
I think the whole point of the black chain link was really because once you plant in front of it, then it really does.
Then it
completely
disappears.
disappears because it's like the negative space between the leaves.
Shadow line caused by
Yeah.
the leaves.
Yeah, so it does.
No, I agree
disappear
with you. If
much
it's planted
later.
in, then it does
Yeah.
disappear. But when it's just out there in nature with,
Good point, though,
with
yeah.
you know, the lower part of our property is all just wild. It's just weeds and oak trees and crap and corruption. It's just, and we have chain link fence on two sides, and you
Mr.
look
Chair,
down, you never see
we
it.
have to move on.
Yeah, let's go.
All right, the next category of proposed changes is guidelines. We've got some ideas for some new guidelines and also, fleshing out and adding more detail to some where we have existing guidelines. And we've got them listed for you. Subdivision projects, which are also going to the Planning Commission. We've seen a couple of those here, and the SFDB seems to always be wondering.
Which page are you on?
Page 15.
15. We got a list of 15.
Tony, if you don't mind, before you list off all those, just to give the context of how these would be worked on, the idea is not that we would flesh all this out right now, definitely not that, but just more that we're looking at, are these good ideas to work on for the future, and then if out of this list you agreed with us, you wanted to take things off or add them, why not, we would present the list to council, and then they would hopefully concur, and then direct the Single Family Design Board to create a subcommittee that could then work on these items with staff, and then they could go back to council for implementation later. So for this effort that we're doing to get this report to council, these items wouldn't be done just yet until the council actually asks us to do them. So it would be worked on in a subcommittee context. So you'd have plenty of opportunity to comment on each item later.
Okay.
Okay, so for site planning and structure placement, we've seen a couple of subdivisions come to SFDB, and the question seems to be, what is SFDB looking at? What kind of comments is Planning Commission looking for from the SFDB? So we were going to come up with some guidelines to, help you in reviewing these projects. And
Yeah, we need that. And, we went to PC and asked them for their comments, and we never got anything out of them. So
that would
I think definitely the board needs some guidance in terms of subdivision review.
Okay. And then uncovered parking spaces. When the NPO was updated 2 years ago, there was provision in the ordinance for properties developed at less than 85% of the max FAR, that single-family projects, that is, that they could have an uncovered parking space instead of the normal 2 required covered spaces in a 2-car garage or 2-car carport. But we don't have any guidelines regarding what these uncovered parking spaces should look like, if they should be screened, where should they be located, the permeability of the surface, etc. So we're proposing to add some guidelines on uncovered parking spaces.
Not in front of the house.
Mm-hmm.
Not in front of the house.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to propose that Tony could just go ahead and read off the whole list, and then as
Sure.
a group you could comment on the list.
Okay. Okay, so the next one is Coastal Bluffs special considerations, including privacy fences and hedges. This is referring to the fact that people do want privacy in their backyards, but in some of these Coastal Bluffs situations, it can really block the neighbor's ocean view. The next one, improve references to city guidelines regarding creeks. And that kind of relates to our stormwater management program. Next is improve references to landscaping guidelines for water conservation. And then we're proposing some compatibility guidelines. We talked about FARs early and the 20 closest FAR information that applicants provide. This would be how to implement FARs as guidelines. The current single-family residence design guidelines just talks about, on multifamily zone lots or lots bigger than 15,000 feet, that the FARs are only guidelines, period. But it doesn't really tell you how to implement them as guidelines. But guidelines really means flexibility. So we're talking about guidelines with, perhaps sticking more closely to the FAR chart if a lot is just barely above 15,000 square feet versus a 3-acre lot, or considering site constraints and slope. We've seen projects, for example, I'm thinking of like La Salle Tourist Road, where you've got a house that's a very little bit of buildable lot area right out by the street, and like the front half of the house is in the front setback, and behind the house the lot just drops dramatically. Maybe consider, even if it is a acre or two lot, that the site is constrained, and maybe that would affect the size of the house that would be appropriate.
Yes. Yeah, build a... All right, well, we're not going to comment on these yet. So.
And that same kind of issue would apply to coastal bluff lots, where the FAR lot area includes area all the way down to the mean high tide line, but much of that is either a required setback from the ocean bluff, the 75-year geologic retreat line, et cetera. So that leaves a lot less usable lot area, and maybe add to the guidelines taking things like that into consideration.
Yeah.
How to use the 20 closest homes data. We talked about that a little bit, but we were also wanting to ask you your ideas as far as, should we present more strongly to you the median of that 20 closest study? We seem to only look at the rankings, and if it's not the biggest, then it's okay, but should more emphasis be given to the median of that? We had that comment from a couple of the neighborhood groups, that we should be thinking about the average for the neighborhood, and the new project should be more in line with the average for the neighborhood, and not just seeing that it's not the very biggest.
Yeah.
And also, do you want... We currently give you 2 pages, like this one on the screen, where we have one sheet where the projects are ranked by the FAR, and the other sheet, the projects ranked by floor area, the total size. But what about the idea of ranking a sheet by the percentage of the maximum FAR? And this example is 2105 Anacapa Street, and this is a project that went to Council on Appeal on Tuesday. And getting back to the chart, you can see that they're ranked by the pure FAR, the ratio of floor area to lot size. But then I've added that column in yellow. It's a little difficult to read from here, but you can see how if you calculate the percentage of max FAR, that doesn't necessarily correlate to the true ratio of floor area to lot size. You can see the project here that ranked the second highest on the FAR was 79% of the max allowed. And way down at number 13, the project that ranked 13th on FAR was actually 104% of the maximum allowed. So maybe it might be better to rank these by percentage of max FAR. That's the question for you. And then moving on to another guideline. This would be in the Good Neighbor Guidelines and Tips. And this would be to revise and update the lighting guidelines. We've noticed some inconsistencies between the guidelines with regard to lighting in the single-family residence design guidelines versus in the city's outdoor lighting guidelines. So we'd like to bring those into more consistency. One place where they are inconsistent is the single-family residence design guideline talks about lamps being concealed within a shield, and it shows graphics of lighting being cast downward. But that's not the way it appears in the outdoor lighting guidelines, where it just specifies that if a lamp is visible, that it be low intensity to not produce glare. And it suggests a 1200 lumen maximum wattage or luminescence, whatever. So we were just thinking of bringing those two documents into better agreement with each other regarding outdoor lighting. And we mentioned another one earlier today regarding a guideline for covered porches, as far as how much covered porch area would be appropriate.
Okay, so that's the list. So, Mr. Chair, again, that's not to discuss the ins and outs of these today, but just, is this the right list? Does anything need to be taken off this list that's not worth changing? Anything we need to add for updating in the guidelines?
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I have one
Yes.
comment, is what happens when the city council says there's no money for this?
And postpones it for 4 years, because that's a reality, and what we have works, and staff should say this is what we would like to accomplish 4 years from now, but understand that there are greater priorities in our community than these items. But these items are important. I'm glad they're written down, but
Yes. Yes, I guess I assume that we all understand that. I have a list of projects that the council has said is very important, and we don't always get to them. But we still want a good record of this review and what you all believe is important. And I do think that a working subcommittee of the group involved can be a very effective way of getting things changed. If it doesn't get too bogged down and too bogged down or expanded into something greater than it needs to be. But we do want to have these ideas documented and get to them as best we can. But reality check is not necessarily 40 years, but a couple of years perhaps down the road on some of the larger. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm hoping even less than 4. And again, if we've got a good working subcommittee, we'd be happy to do what we can with you all.
Okay. That's good.
Thank you. Mr. Chair?
Yes.
One thing I didn't find on here that I was hoping to find was a discussion about how the basements are calculated.
You mean basements that are partially exposed, not totally buried?
Just the whole basement. Flexibility, I guess we'd call it. Over flexibility.
Mr. Chair, the actual basement calculation method is more an ordinance requirement rather than a guideline. And there actually were various proposals given in our interviews with groups wanting to change how that is calculated. And we are not recommending revisiting that area, but certainly this board could have some input on whether we should or shouldn't. So it'll be in the next part 3, which we're not going to go through. But if you're welcome to revisit that issue, we think it's a very complicated issue to get into. And there's various proposals to give partial credit, no credit, and to consider basements in a different manner. But we feel that basements are what they are now, and it seems to be working. The board recognizes when they're full basements and when they're partial basements.
Mr. Chair, I think, was the question more related to more of a information about how the calculation is done, not to change the calculation, just giving a little bit more information in the guidelines for the public about that?
That's part of it.
Okay.
And how we think it's working, how the community thinks it's working.
Okay, so yeah, that's in the next part of the presentation. Staff, as Jaime explained, is not proposing to change the rules, but if you feel like people need to understand how to do the calculations better, that'd be more of a staff, like a counter handouts for applicants or something like that, or do you want to see something in the guidelines about that, about how those calculations are done?
Let me think about that.
I think that, one of the things about basements that is a consideration is I mean, you can look at the basement as having a visual impact if part of it's exposed. Like if it's a garage, you're driving down into a garage, it becomes like a 3-story thing. So there's a visual impact to certain basements, and that's one issue that the board has. Then there's the basement that's totally submerged and you can't see it, but it may add to the intensity of the project, and so it has a neighborhood impact. Here's a big basement. The guy's going to have a 20-seat theater down there or something like that, and the neighbors say, "Gee whiz, that's really intensifying the use of this piece of property," and that's a different kind of a consideration. I don't know that that's addressed at all in the guidelines. I think to some degree the visibility of the basement is addressed in some way, but the intensity isn't. Should it be or shouldn't it be? Isn't that kind of what you were? Yeah. There's those two considerations.
Okay, we're
I
ready
think
to move
that
along.
What?
Ready to go to the next item?
Yeah, but I want to just emphasize that I think that the board does have concerns about big pieces of property that permit a huge house because the FAR doesn't make any difference, but most of the property isn't developable. And so they have a little piece of property really that they can build this house on, and the FAR is really low. But the truth of the matter is, there's not the kind of flexibility as if it's a flat acre and you can put the house any place you want, as opposed to if most of it's ocean. That's a real. I think that's and also hillside houses where there's practically no room to build, but still it's a big lot, so we have a very small FAR, and it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't fit into the system that we've devised. So I think those are really important.
Also, Mr. Chair, we didn't develop any maximum size of basements.
Yeah.
And people are pushing the envelope on partial basements and getting 3,000 square foot basement just to get more square footage at 50% credit.
Yeah.
So
and it's an intensification of the neighborhood.
Right. So in the subcommittee, we may bring it up, but we're not recommending we change the ordinance at this point.
Okay.
Oh, that's right. I skipped glass railings. You all actually already did a subcommittee for that guideline, so we'll just plan on rolling that into the document when we make the guideline changes.
Okay.
Okay,
Let's
the
go
next item is proposed change 7 regarding parking. And when the NPO was updated a couple of years ago for lots developed with less than 85% FAR, you were allowed to do one uncovered parking space. We talked about adding guidelines for that. This change really originated with our zoning staff because they've seen sort of this being misapplied. The intention, I think, for this one uncovered space provision was for the typical older development, the houses built in the 20s, 30s, 40s, on smaller lots where you've got the house at the front of the lot, and then way in the back corner you had a little one-car garage. Mm-hmm. So the idea was to allow an addition to that house, and once you add above 50% of the square footage to the house, you have to bring the parking up to code.
Yes.
So this was meant to allow some flexibility in allowing these kinds of projects to do an uncovered space instead of forcing them to build a big new two-car garage. And it also, this part of the ordinance also provides that uncovered parking space can encroach within 3 feet of the property line. So it could encroach into the setback to 3 feet of the property line if the distance between the space and property line has a landscape buffer. But our zoning staff's seen, like I said, sort of even new development on vacant lots using this provision, proposing parking in the setback, not proposing the two covered parking spaces where perhaps they easily could do a two-car garage with a new project. So we were proposing this to tighten that up. And I think it would be a rare case when this kind of situation wouldn't already be coming into design review. But the proposal is, for the few cases it would be doing some sort of project where they would be proposing an uncovered space, that we trigger the uncovered space for design review.
Yeah, and I think we should have a finding. The board should have to make a finding that there's a what is it that we say for a modification? There's a what? Yeah, that's too loose. But there's a suffering. There's a reason. Hardship. Well, something like that. That you're just not letting them do an uncovered parking space because they don't want to build a two-car garage when they could. If you can do it some other way, don't do it. In other words, we need to make that finding.
And we've also seen uncovered spaces proposed on very large properties. And the question is that appropriate or not?
No, probably isn't.
So I know this runs counter to what we're saying about trying to reduce design review, but like I said, these are probably rare examples when these could be proposed without design review, so we would just be triggering a few projects just triggering it for the uncovered space if necessary, just to get discretionary review of it. And then we have an optional second proposed change, 7A, to allow two uncovered spaces. So you wouldn't need any covered parking. You could have your two spaces both be uncovered when you have below 80% of the max FAR. And the reasons are listed here. Reasons for, and then some possible disadvantages of this change to the ordinance. So I think you all have read through that. So any comments on these proposals regarding parking?
So the first change would be to correct something where we think we created a loophole to allow uncovered spaces. And the second proposal is basically throwing out the idea concept, would this board support situations for two uncovered spaces? And we know this is a controversial item, and it may develop into no support, limited support, because this ordinance standard has been around for quite some time, and people like it, hiding cars on properties. So it's there for food for thought.
Yeah.
I mean, the provision does state that the cars wouldn't be visible. The uncovered parking spaces wouldn't be visible. And just to give some background also from the MPO steering committee update process, I actually do believe that there was a conscious intent that since we were putting maximum size limits on homes, that if people wanted to have flexibility to provide more living space versus using up space in their garage area, that the uncovered parking space did give that flexibility, that they could gain 250 square feet of living space. I'm hearing now that no, actually the intent was for these non-conforming lots, but that's not my correct recollection. Whatever, that's fine. But for the two uncovered spaces, that would be the idea that if someone was bumping up against that maximum, had a way that they could hide the spaces and wanted to use that last bit of 500 square feet or 400 square feet in the house, that they could if it was designed appropriately. Santa Barbara doesn't have a very, very harsh climate where protecting cars from weather is entirely necessary all the time. If it could be screened, is that something that the board would entertain? This proposal was from our transportation division, who they've been just questioning whether or not it really is necessary to always have two parking spaces for every single family home if the future of our development patterns as sustainable Santa Barbara is going towards mass transit, bicycle transit, walking, etc. So it's this might be ahead of our time here, but we just thought we would throw it out for food for thought. This is something to think about for future in cases where it might not lead to visible cars.
Do you want comments on this? Anybody want to make a comment? I know that Gary rides a bicycle here every so often.
Yeah.
Does he have a garage, though?
I have a two-car garage.
I just think if we look at the demographics of Santa Barbara, we're going to realize that most people in the city are not going to ride bicycles, and we might as well face up to that. And this is dreaming.
Spaces would still be there. They would just be uncovered.
Ocean OB, down in San Diego, yes, it might work. Not here. Most. What is it? Do we know what the average age of the city is?
Yes. Not off the top of my head, but yes.
Yeah. About 55 or 58 or something like that.
We have a really high percentage, more than the state average, of younger people, 18 and under. And then, as has traditionally been thought, we have a higher population of seniors as well. We just are pulling together the demographics in our housing element. But I'm sorry, I don't have them all at my... But that was certainly noted, that there are a lot of younger single people actually in this community, higher than
and between the shoreline and the Mission is a elevation of 700 feet. So we live in a very hilly. This is not Amsterdam. This is a hilly, slopey city, and riding bicycles uphill is very hard.
Mr. Chair.
where we are going.
One thing that I think, if you read this, that I think is being thought about in this idea also is, again, just reducing the amount of covered area that the parking garage has in terms of permeability and physical mass of the building. And again, if people had the choice, could they do it in their home instead of for the garage? But I do think that this is, I asked the staff to separate it out because it's really distinctly different kind of thing to talk about versus 7 alone we know we want to do. 7A is really more for just consideration and discussion.
Yeah, I really think it's beyond the purview of the board. It is really more of a major planning issue for the city than it is, for this board to determine.
Mr. Chair, there's 2 comments there.
Yeah.
I have a comment.
I was just going to, from the beach to the mission is actually a pretty easy bike ride uphill.
For you.
For anyone under 50, I would say. Well, I just threw that number out.
60.
I would like to look at this case by case basis because having uncovered parking also eats up your site, but on the other hand, it could be a positive. So that's just my comment. Case by case.
Denise?
I agree with that.
Mr.
Gary?
Chair, I disagree with 7A on a policy basis. The 2-car garage and how people use the inside of the garage is up to the individual user, whether they use it as a bootleg rec room or their science project or train room or kind of thing, whether they park the cars in front of the garage or not. But as soon as we tell people they can park the cars somewhere else and that room is lost forever, I think we're going to run into some other terrible problems. So I don't think we should go down that road because it could be more detrimental. And we need to have that flexible space because people who are in the homes have different styles, a lot of storage, 1 car, 2 cars. So I think it's a bad idea, and I've reviewed it.
It seems to me like it's a downgrading of the quality of the community. You get outside of Taos, New Mexico, for instance, the city of Taos, and it's in the county, and there are no regulations. You can build $1 million house, and next door people can put a trailer. They don't have to have any garages or anything. But you come into the city, they realize they're going to upgrade. Everybody has to have a garage. And I think the whole idea is ludicrous, and it's a downgrading of the community. And I would never support it. But I do agree that it's kind of a planning issue rather than a single-family design board review. That we should be making these things on a case-by-case basis is, maybe that's okay, but there might be a situation where it really is a hardship to provide a garage on a particular site. I could see how that might happen. In fact, I think there was one on the Mesa not too long ago where it was a very, very narrow driveway, and so anyway.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
I kind of feel like I'm with the 7A. I mean, I wouldn't support parking in any of the front yard setbacks or areas like that. But garages, I think if you went and opened up 10% of the garages in Santa Barbara, you're not going to find a car in there. And so what happens is if you go and you open up these up, there's no car in it. They're parking on the street or in the driveway. So what we have is we've got a design parameter that says you must have this garage, and then we're forcing cars out into the street. And that is not the best formula. And if they had a carport, they can't put their train set out in there, and you can't put a thing. Now, I personally enjoy a garage, and I have all kinds of stuff, and I tinker in it, and I have my car in there, but it's not saying you can't have a garage, but it is making people have a designated parking space that's not in the setback, where normally they'll have a garage right at the 20-foot level and they're parking the car right there in front, or they're parking it on the street. And I think it could be a good thing to have the carport.
I'm counting a split vote on this, Mr. Chair, so we can move on based on
Right.
that split vote.
Okay,
Okay, just
I'm for that.
one more minor one to mention. Proposed change 8. Update the ordinance to clarify that programs equivalent to the Contractors Association Built Green are acceptable for houses larger than 4,000 square feet. To recognize alternate programs other than the SB Contractors Association. We sort of already do this. We just need to update the ordinance language to clarify.
Okay.
And we talked
We've
about
done 9 already.
So that covers our proposed changes.
Sounds good. So what's going to happen at this Saturday meeting now?
Okay, so we do, Mr. Chair, yes, we do have some next steps, but in our last few minutes here, Jaime also has some information that he'd like to give you about appeals data, but since you did ask, our next steps will be October 24th, 2009, public workshop, 9 to noon, Faulkner Gallery at the Public Library. We've invited your board as well as all of these other boards and commissions and the council. If there is a quorum, we do have the noticing to take care of that, but it's not to be a formal meeting of any of these groups. It's just to be a public workshop where we'll have a staff report presentation based on this report. We may update this based on your comments today, or we might provide an addendum based on your comments.
Okay.
And so then the staff would present, and then we'd have public comment, basically a formal public comment period at the workshop. So we do invite you and encourage you to attend if you would like to, but it's not required. So Jaime has a couple things. I don't know if we could probably skip the site visit. You know where you went. If you want to bring that up at the end, any particular observations you wanted to share with the board, you could. I think Jaime would like to go over the both the statistics of applications and the appeal data. Do you want to start with the appeal data?
Yes.
Okay.
What we did was go back pre-NPO update and compared the trend of appeals. And what you can see from these statistics is that we did tend to have average 5 or 6 appeals, mostly related to SFD or single-family residential development. And we did notice a drop when we started implementing or talking about FAR regulations. So we believe the statistics show that people are designing smaller homes, and we're going to have some more information to show you that. And smaller homes are less controversial. There's less controversy because most of the neighbors feel that there's some caps in place, and this board is enforcing those caps. And so, and the ones that have been filed, we have actually had some successes in withdrawing these appeals, having the neighbors and the folks get together and having a discussion about reducing the project size even further to avoid the lengthy appeal process. Can you move on now? Now, what we did also is we looked at all the FAR data that we, in a 2-year time period. What you have here are 2 pie charts, one period from July 2003 to July 2005 on the left here, side here, for comparison purposes to the last 2 years that the Single Family Design Board has been in place. And the reason we went back to 2003, 2005 is because about 2005 we started releasing FAR figures and adopting actually some interim ordinances that were in effect. So we thought this was a better comparison purposes. But what this graph is telling you is that we have, again, more projects that are being designed to be less than 85%. And what's a little bit unusual about when we look at these numbers, though, also is that there was an increase in the number of applications due to the T-Fire. And the T-Fires were primarily demo rebuilds or reconstruction projects that often were proposing to be 2-story projects instead of 1-story projects. The development potential increased as a result of these proposals, and so we had more projects come in, I think, which sort of swayed the numbers a little bit. But as you can see, you do have more projects coming in within these caps. And what's interesting here, if you can look at the yellow part of it, before the NPO, we had a lot more projects that were being designed. Pardon me, the light blue. You see that? Those 15 projects over 100% of FAR, those are now gone. There's 15 less homes, about 7 or 8 homes a year that were controversial because they were large, and now you only have essentially one that was approved, and that was because it was already over the FAR and they were allowed 100 square foot addition. So those aren't happening anymore. You're not getting those type of proposals that are being developed. So I think this tells us that we're people are designing to the limits that are in place now. So I think it's successful. That they know that there's an easier process if you design to a lower FAR. And we also have FAR information that we're putting on the web, along with a database that Tony is going to manage that will give us an opportunity. So over time, we'll have statistics that are in place that define the actual size of homes throughout the city as we accumulate the data. So that'll be beneficial to have as far as knowing what's coming in as far as ranges of homes.
Mr. Chair, so this is the large lot data. So the one we were just looking at was comparison for lots 15,000 square feet and under. So you can see the difference is not as dramatic on this one because the FARs are guidelines versus standards.
Right. So we're still seeing homes that are being designed over the 100% maximum, but there's where that flexibility is, where you can see that there's not really an issue on a bigger lot. So there are examples of homes that you do approve over the 100% maximum guideline where you feel it's appropriate to do so. So there's not much of a big change here, other than, again, those large lots do tend to fall in that 50 to 85% now. People know that they're there, and they tend to not want to push the envelope as much.
Okay.
Any other
I think that
comments
concludes.
or discussion from the Single Family Design Board for today? Thank you for all your comments
Thank you.
so
That's a
far.
very good report. We'll look forward to seeing you on Saturday.
Okay,
Not this Saturday, but I think it's the next Saturday, isn't it? 2 Saturdays.
Can we do a 5-minute break?
We can take a 5-minute break now. We'll start with item number 1, which is 117 East Islay Street. This is a proposal to combine 2 existing houses and garages into one single-family residence. A permit was issued in 1987 for this work, but the work was never completed, and the permit expired. The project includes about an 800 square foot first floor addition, an 800 square foot second story addition, demolition of a 200 square foot garage within the setback, a new 400 square foot detached 2-car garage, a covered roof deck tower element, new patio trellis, and remodeling. The portions of the existing house that encroach into the interior setback will remain. The proposed total of 3,600 square feet on a 10,000 square foot lot is 94.7% FAR. Action may be taken if sufficient information is provided. If you 2 gentlemen would give your names for the record, please.
Brian Nelson, project architect.
Sorry, can we? There we go.
Should be on. Brian Nelson, project architect.
Jeffrey Long, owner with my wife Cheryl.
And part of my team is Dwight Gregory, who's been processing the project.
Okay, welcome. Why don't you give us a...
Does staff have anything to start with, because this has been going on for a long time, project? Or do you want me to just start? Okay.
It's kind of a clean slate, isn't it?
It is and it isn't.
I mean, I know I saw the house, and I see it's in partial...
Right.
Yeah.
And I'd like to start by explaining where it is in the block. I think that's a really important part. So I got this aerial photo with a topo on it. And here's East Islay with the address on it. But this house is in front of it with its pool. This house is next to it with its guest house. This house comes off of Anacapa. This one comes off of, what's above Islay? Pedregosa. Okay, and you can see the tree line between this property and all the other properties because it's all their backyards. So you have to understand that this is really buried. This driveway is only 10 or 12 feet wide coming back here, and then there's more trees, and then the garage is going to be over here, so you can't possibly see it from the street. And you can see the distance from each of these houses, because of the backyard situation. So I think it's important that you understand how buried this house is. And so that's where I'd like to start. It was originally a little house here and a small house here with a garage in between and a breezeway. That's where the original permits started with Corey Rapp back in 1986, 87. So I think that's important that you see with the trees and all the other things what's going on around it. If you haven't been out to the site, have all of you done a site visit yet? Drive-by or anything?
I did.
Okay. So you understand how remote it is then, Bill, back in there. Mm-hmm. I brought a copy of the permits along to show you that they got as far as up-framed, the sub-roof put on, the tar paper put on the roof, the tar paper put on the walls for the plaster, and money flow stopped, and it has been sitting. It is the same owners. It hasn't changed hands. It's the same owners. His children are now through college, and he's able to continue with the project. So it's been sitting, and the house in the front was still the original house, so they've been living in the original house on the front, and the addition just stopped back in '92. And so you can see all of the approvals they got, for roughs and foundation and rough electrical and everything else up to the point where in 1992 they stopped. They needed to obtain a roofing, get the roofing on, all rough ends by September of '92. That was the last note on the plan. So that's the kind of the history and background behind it. So for those of you who have not been there, this is the street scene coming in from Islay. This is the driveway going in. This is the house in front of it with a pool behind it. So as you walk about 100 yards down this driveway, you come to this gate and the end of the existing house. So this would be the driveway where you're going to pull around and go into the garage there. So it's really buried back in the site. This is the house.
That's the front house. Yeah.
The house in the front, and you walk up the driveway to get to its front door, and then you just keep coming, and you end up at the house in the back. This is the streetscape across the street. This is across the street, so you can see what's in the neighborhood. You can see there's large two-story homes in the neighborhood. And then once you get back to the gates, this is what the first thing you can see as you're coming to the back of the front house, the house in front. And I took this picture on purpose so you can see that you can't see even the tower or anything as you come up the driveway. It's really, you have to be on the site in order to see it. And this is the state that it's in today. So, okay. With that in mind.
So just going back to that for a minute for just one
sure.
question. So when you're referring to the last picture there.
Last picture.
So you refer to this as the tower?
That's what I call it.
But
yeah.
it is an occupiable space.
No, it is not.
Sure.
Well, it semi-is. It has a pull-down ladder so that somebody can go up from this family room up to that space, but it's not. Doesn't have a legal staircase.
I see.
It's an open patio kind of thing.
Open patio, beautiful views, of course, of the city and looking out to the.
Okay, I got it.
The back of the mesa.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So with that in mind, I'd like to go to the site plan. These drawings of the site plan and floor plans and elevations were taken from Corey Rapp's, and then we have done some modification to those. There was a portion of the building that was approved, and you'll see it on the floor plans, that was sitting out here, and part of that was a breezeway, part of that was a garage. And so after talking with staff over long period of time recently, we've come to the conclusion that we don't want to continue to have that space. We're going to remove what has been built there because it would require modification. And so in order to remove all modifications off the table, for height, for anything, we're not asking for any modifications. We meet all the requirements. And so if we left that in, we'd be here, then we'd go to mod, then we'd come, and we decided that was not that important. So we have removed a portion that used to be a dining room in that area, or we're going to be removing it so that we don't have modification, because the existing house was sitting in the setback, and this portion of this house is sitting in the setback, that little piece. And then we were going to have more.
That was going to be new.
Well, it wasn't new, but it wasn't occupied space before. It was a garage and a breezeway. And so it wasn't occupied space, so therefore it was a change of use. Okay? So as you come down this long driveway, and then finally you get to the property, the garage is going to be here with its turnaround and the guest parking in front of it with the turnaround there. The gates are here, and the front door is around on this side of the house, here.
Okay.
Okay. And then, don't know how much you want to go into details. Here's the garage, the guest parking, the turnaround. Here's the front door. The living is on this end, kitchen in the middle with dining room. This was going to be the extension of the dining room that we're now going to remove. The master suite's at this end with the yard out here. The majority of the yard, the big palm tree is back here with the trees all the way around the back. That's the first floor. The second floor, which is the addition, which meets all the setbacks, is 2 bedrooms, so it's the kids' area, or in this case might be the grandkids, now that the kids are off out of college. And then in this playroom, there's the access ladder up into the tower. So there's, so there's the roof plan. You can see all the pictures of the roof with that observation tower up there. And then the exterior elevation. So here's your front door in the middle of the house. This is the tower that you saw in the photographs. Everything that you see here has been up and framed. On this side of the house, it's up, framed, and sitting there, including the decks, and the spiral stair isn't there, but the roof pitches, chimneys are framed up, all those things. The thing that isn't there is the garage. So here's the elevations of the garage. Going to do a flat roof, parapeted roof on that. On this back side, on the State Street side, this was going to be the addition, or it's already there, the dining room, and we've changed it to French doors looking out into that patio now, and gotten rid of the addition that was there. We meet the height requirements. We meet, like I say, everything so that we're not requiring any modifications.
Okay.
Jeff has been to the neighbors, and I'd like for him to present what he did to the neighbors, or with the neighbors. Not to them, with them. Little slip of the tongue there.
Okay, the original notification affidavit is here, filled out. And then I did my walk around to all the properties that we were supposed to contact, and handed out this form. A lot of my neighbors were not home, in fact, most of them. This particular one I got back in the mail from Dick Suiting, and he has a little note on here of support. And then the other supporters are listed here. I just made a little statement above. We, the undersigned, have met with Jeff and Cheryl Long regarding the completion of their remodel project. We are fully enthusiastically in support of this project and hope that you will lend your approval as well. There's names, and there's their address over there for that.
Why don't you point out, do you have the map? Point out which neighbors these are.
I can explain it. Yeah.
Okay. Let's go back to the site plan for a moment, or this one. This is probably better.
Yeah. In addition, let me add, too, that Kyle Brace, our next-door neighbor, who is one of the primary neighbors along the,
State Street side.
Yeah, is here present, and she is in support of our project, and if you'd like her to speak, she's happy to do so.
She's a yellow slip for her, so she will speak.
Yeah. Okay.
When she handed us the yellow slip, she says, I really don't want to speak. I'm just here to say I'll support the project. So you can ask her.
That'll be a quick speech.
All right. Now, we've got Santa Barbara.
Yeah, Santa Barbara,
Okay.
Isley. You got your brain in?
No.
Here's your driveway coming up here.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Heather Gregory is the owner of this property here. That's the first signature.
Okay.
1833 Santa Barbara. That is going to be, I
Santa
think
Barbara
it's
has
this little
this one.
house right here, and I can't read their name. 108 East Islay. We also have the support of this one here, which is over here.
Ledger Village, huh?
Yeah, and then the written letter is from Dick Suding, who is right there.
Okay.
We had a couple across the street because we needed the amount, and we had to go across the street for a couple other ones. So he's one of the other ones. So,
And then Mrs. Brace, who's here.
yeah.
Okay. All right, I think we've got it. Do you have anything on this, Tony?
Yes, Mr. Chair, this project's unusual because it's built, it's there in place now, and after the fact they're coming to you for approval.
Yeah.
But this was underway back in the 80s, and back at that time it didn't require design review, so the ABR never saw it. Now it's coming to design review because it's a two-story. But we would ask that you consider the fact that they did have permits in place, so it's not like as-built. Of course, you still have to make NPO findings,
Yes.
see that it's compatible, etc.
Thank you. All right, I'll open a public comment here. Kyle, will you come forward and just speak right into the microphone there and tell us how you feel?
I'm Kyle Brace, and I'm at 115 East Islay, probably your closest neighbor, and I'm not in opposition to this project. I support it, approve from the standpoint of the neighboring property.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else like to address the board on this particular item? I see no one coming forward, so I'll close the public portion of it, and it is to the board for your questions and or comments. Gwen?
Mr. Chair, two questions. Well, Tony answered my third one, which was what kind of review happened in 1987, and it sounds like there was no design
Nothing
review
required.
at that point.
Right.
The second question was the archive plans. Are these? Is this a different general design, or is that one little wing taken off, or has this whole house been redesigned?
The drawings that you have here are the ones from Corey Rapp, with the exception that we changed this to take off that dining room.
So it was scanned. And
It was scanned and just put in.
Okay, so
Yes.
this is effectively what you got
It's
a permit
exactly,
for.
yep.
Okay.
This is the archive set.
And then has a 20 closest home review been done?
Yeah, that's for you walked
The stuff we walked around, you mean?
I mean, the FAR, 20 for the FAR.
Oh, for the FAR. Oh,
No.
the statistics.
Yes.
Yeah, we need the statistics for the 20 closest homes, all the FARs, the floor areas, that kind of stuff.
I can get it next week, but I don't have
You did it already.
it. It's but not in their formats.
We've done it, but not in your format, so
Okay.
we'll have to redo it.
What are, Tony, what are other, when we go over 85%, what are the other requirements besides the 20 closest home statistics?
Oh, because
We have a street, I guess you did have a kind of a street panorama, some additional photographs.
It's usually those two things that we require or ask for when the application's submitted. The 20 closest FARs and a panoramic street photo with a simulation of the development and a streetscape elevation drawing.
This is so far
But
back
it's,
that it's
yeah.
almost not, it's really
It's not
in the
on the
middle of the
street.
block. It's a flag lot in the middle of the block, so, but a few pictures of houses would be appropriate to bring us
Sure.
in the neighborhood so we can evaluate the character of the neighborhood.
right.
So we'll need those two things when you return. Okay, do we have?
Well,
other-
you said two things. Do we need to do the streetscape? Or?
The streetscape is one thing.
Okay. And the,
other-
the photos.
statistics.
Yes.
No,
Got
the
it.
statistics.
Okay.
The 20 closest home statistics,
it.
FARs, areas, etc.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yes.
If we can go to that third floor plan, or where that deck is that's non-occupiable but does have a pull-down stair. Can you tell us what the setbacks are from the property line to the openings that are in that tower element?
Yep. You can give me a scale.
Oh, they're gigantic.
Just want a number.
Come back one. Well, there it is, right there. Scale. Somebody have one? 8.
1/8.
Sorry, I didn't bring mine. Thank you. Okay. We are back 23.5 feet, 24 feet maybe? 23.5, 24.
Okay, and then on this side it'd be about 30.
Oh, on that side it's 40.
Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Gary?
The other deck, what's the setback on the other deck on the second floor?
Well, there's another deck on the second floor here.
Yeah.
It's on this side of the house, so it's going to be 44 feet or something off of the north property, 45 feet off the north property line, and 34 feet off the rear property line.
How about this side of the property line?
Doesn't
that deck wrap around?
Oh, it does.
All
I'm
the way
sorry.
to here?
Yeah, so it's 10 feet off that side.
That's the one.
Okay.
Thank you, Gary.
That's the number you were looking for?
So,
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I had a question. A couple
Okay.
questions. Are you adding any new driveway paving?
Inside the property line, yes. The driveway itself, we are hoping to get together with the neighbors and split on the existing driveway. It's a concrete driveway right now in fairly sound shape, but we do want to replace that eventually.
So I guess why does it go from narrow to more wide as you reach the garage on sheet 1?
For maneuverability?
Yeah.
From the
You're talking about in this area right here?
right, exactly.
Yeah, from the maneuverability, the guest coming in and then turning around and going back out.
And this
As you're
house
zigzagging.
on the street, existing one-story residence, their garage is this one right here, and they need back-out space so they can make it down the driveway too.
Sorry, say that again.
Yeah. My house here,
Right.
the house that we share the driveway with, this is their garage, and so they need turnaround space so they can back out of the garage and head down the driveway.
So this wide piece is for people.
For traffic in and out.
Probably more for when you come here, probably more to make that turn that way.
Yeah.
Right.
Radius there. My other question was, is the site already landscaped, or
Yes.
are there areas around the house that still need landscaping once this project's complete?
Many mature trees.
And
And,
here, you can see the pictures. It's kind of buried.
It's hard to tell if
Yeah.
what's around
Oh, yeah.
against the
True.
house, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Either bring us more pictures of landscaping around the house, the existing landscaping, so that can be evaluated, or a plan that shows kind of, at least in a preliminary sense, what the existing landscaping is. A picture is probably easier.
Especially the trees.
Yeah.
You want to have all the trees on that site plan. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes,
Denise?
please.
Okay.
I'm looking at the 1250 square foot open space, and I'm noticing that it's hanging into the setback areas, and I don't think that's something that maybe staff allowed that for
The
some.
1,250 square feet?
Yeah.
I think that can go into the
Yeah,
setback.
it can.
Yeah.
Huh?
It can't be in
Yeah.
the front yard setback,
Yeah,
but it can be in the interior yard
side,
setbacks.
in the interior setbacks, it's okay.
Huh.
Yes, it's,
Well, I just had a plan kicked back to me for the same reason.
Really?
So I was curious. Yeah.
really.
Tony, can you comment on that? The 1,250 square foot open space is in the interior yard setback. That's appropriate, isn't it?
That's
Future
acceptable.
setbacks. Yeah.
Yeah, you need
So
to
I
kick
see.
that one back to them. Yeah. Okay,
Mr. Chair?
yes.
I guess I do have a question.
Okay.
I'm just trying trying to figure out, maybe when they come back, they can explain to me. So one of them is I would want to see what other 3-story houses are in the neighborhood and how this one's compatible in that regard. And then I'd also like to see this 3rd story, how it's changing, if it's coming out, if there's going to be areas to get outside on it, and how that changes from what you have.
I don't think there are
the
any.
tower, no.
The tower, okay.
It's in the roof.
Because it
It's
just
part of the roof.
looks so different.
It looks different. It's all roofs around it. These roofs come up to the edge of it.
Is it closed in with windows, or is it open?
It's open.
It's open.
Permanently open.
Bernie, what was your question? If there's a deck off of this level?
No,
there is not.
And if I might add too, the house is not 3-story, just the towers would be a
Towers
technical-
don't count as a story if they're not occupiable.
It's an architectural embellishment, I understand.
Architectural, it's not, towers don't count, as you know. So if it just has a ladder to it, it's not considered occupiable.
Mr. Chair?
Okay, Gary?
I was under the impression that it couldn't have floor area in order for it to not be considered. If it was open ceiling from the 2nd floor, but it actually has floor area, where anything over 5 feet counts as floor area.
You mean it's more like an attic?
It's more than an architectural element. It's accessible through a ladder or through a pull-down staircase, and it has a floor area. So it's not really a roof element, and it's not really an architectural element. It's larger than 4 feet, so I think it's a deck. So I think we need to consider it as a deck.
I think we have Tony, I think we have an issue here that maybe it's not clear. It's not clear what typically speaking, towers are different. I mean, they're not this. You could climb up the ladder and have and use this as an observation. You could call it an observation tower in a sense, but it is not really occupiable because it doesn't have a legal stairs. Doesn't the 3rd floor have to have 2 stairs out?
2 exits, yeah, if it's occupied.
2 exits.
Really?
Yeah.
Only if it's more than
500
more than maybe. I think it's 1,000 square feet. It's occupant 10 occupants. What?
I think it's lower square feet than 1,000.
Yeah,
Okay.
something.
Mr. Chair,
Okay.
We need to check this out before next time.
is the question whether it counts in FAR?
That's one of the questions, is whether it counts in FAR. And the other question is it really considered a true tower, or is it something else? If this is an attic,
Or a deck.
well, let's just take if it's an attic, the top of the roof is over the 30-foot height limit. In other words, you in the residential zone, the height limit is 30 feet, right?
And we're at 30.
Including, no, I think 37 feet.
30.
30.
We're 30.
Okay, 30. Okay, so yeah, I guess this question is whether it's FAR or not.
Okay, I was going to clarify it.
I thought that was 37. I apologize.
Because it does have a floor, we wouldn't consider it to be a tower, so it does have to meet the 30-foot limit. And if it's unenclosed, is it enclosed or unenclosed?
Unenclosed.
Unenclosed.
So it's unenclosed, it doesn't count as floor area.
Yeah, because it's like a loggia, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Just what we were talking about earlier today.
Mm-hmm.
A porch. It's like a porch. So, but it isn't. What your ruling is not a tower. So this is a 3-story. This is a 3-story building, but it is not a tower. But it's not occupied.
Well, I guess technically it would be like a covered roof deck rather than a story.
No, it's not a roof. It's not a deck because it's not occupiable because it doesn't have proper stairs. It's you know, it skirts all of our definitions. Oh,
Mr. Chair, can I
Yeah.
jump in with a couple things?
Yeah.
These are under comments.
yeah.
First of all, the project that's being present. I don't have a problem with the project. I understand how you were building it with a legitimate building permit. Things happened, and now we're back to where we are. So it is what it is. But looking at the rules, applying today's rules to the structure at hand, the project is over 85% FAR. It's
It's 94.7.
94.7. So in our rules, we say that projects that are over 85% of the maximum FAR are not to exceed 25 feet in height. So the tower element or that roof section at 30 feet exceeds it. So in that respect, the project has to be modified with that element removed, from my perspective, or
Lowered.
lowered, removed, or we have to be okay with it and make findings for it. In order from my perspective to make findings that I'm okay with that tower element, I'd want to include that as part of your FAR square footage, which then would bump you into more than 100% FAR, because it is adding bulk mass and scale to your structure. So you look at the overall project and we're trying to decide how large the home is, and as soon as you have this third story element with the opening in the roof, that's mass. So if you are over 100% FAR, then the project has to go to the Planning Commission for their okay, with the supermajority from the board presenting. I basically would be okay being on the supermajority side because it's an existing situation that's fallen into the cracks. Another situation and having to deal with being more than 25 feet or the 30 feet is Mr. Suding had an issue with a really steep roof that once your attic space is more than 5 feet, you have to include part of that square footage in your calculations. And he was a home that was over 100%, I think, and he went to the Planning Commission and got his project approved because it was part of the architectural character. So reading from our guidelines where we talk about projects over the maximum square footage, we say the subject lot exhibits physical conditions such as location, surrounding topography, or the size of the lot relative to the others that do not generally exist in the other lots of the neighborhood. So I feel like I personally can make the findings for leaving the tower and the upper story, but it would have to go to the Planning Commission and having their okay. The other option is to remove the covered roof element, take that parapet down to 25-foot max, and now your whole structure is under 25 feet. You're less than 80. You're more than 85, but less than 100%. And then in addition to what Gary's comments were about decks that need to be at least 15 feet from the side yard, and some other things that we're going to apply today's understanding to your existing structure. So those
15 feet or 10 feet on the deck?
15 feet.
15?
I think, and we're focusing on this
little
part
corner.
of it right there, yeah.
Yeah, that corner.
15 feet from that property line.
okay.
On that one side, that was the one that...
Okay, those are good. Those are good comments, Paul.
Yep.
Thank you. We have other comments? Okay. But we want to continue this then with those comments that Paul made to see with the applicant will take a look at revising the tower, bring it down, or if he's over 100, FAR over 100, then this is going to go to PC.
That's the choice that I would give the applicant.
Yeah.
Can I ask Paul a question?
Yes, of course.
We have an opportunity to reduce square footage by taking this covered spa area in the back where the hot tub is and keeping the tower with square footages and be under the 100%. That would be acceptable. What I heard from you is you didn't have a problem with the tower, but technically we're going to be over 100%.
So you're going to take square footage somewhere else?
Take it off the ground.
Take that off and add that in
and keep
see
this
how
back
it
in.
calculates.
Then I would say that this board can make the findings because you're less than 100% FAR
Okay.
on the architecture.
I just wanted to know
We
that
could make
before
the
I came
doesn't mean
back.
that we are making the findings,
With
but we,
an idea.
we have the opportunity to make the findings.
Yeah. Okay.
And altering this other deck.
Yeah, we'll get some roof back there and get that away from the property line.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, to clarify, Paul was right about exceeding 85%. Then once you exceed 85%, you can't exceed 25 feet.
Without going to PC.
Right.
Oh, so we still, even
have to get
because we're
below
over
85.
85. Oh, okay. So that doesn't help. Okay.
Because the
Got it.
first set of plans that we took in for this application had it just under 85%. And that's when we did the plan check and saw, okay, it's under 85%, it's under 30 feet, so it's okay. But then the revised plans got above 85%, and we missed the zoning plan check correction.
So
Okay.
you need to
Got it.
have some things to do. This is probably going to be over 85, so you've got to do the
Yep.
statistics. You've got to do some pictures, panoramas of the streetscape there on Islay. You're going to take a look at revising the area of the house to try to get it down somewhere between 85 and 100. And so think about this tower, how you can do that, and also modify that deck in the back, on the second-story deck.
I guess I'd kind of like to hear from the board, maybe because they didn't have any other comments. Is the tower element okay if we do other things and get under the 85, or does anybody have a problem with the tower element? Okay, then we'll work the numbers and work.
I have some problems with it,
Should
but
we do a straw poll on that, or is it too early in the design for a straw poll?
yes. Well, let's just go one at a time here.
I was just
Bernie?
going to ask the applicant, I didn't get over there, and I noticed a couple of other hands went up. I would like to go see the tower.
Sure.
Between now and when you come back before I vote.
When I went, the gates were locked, and I couldn't get into. I just had to look at it from a distance. By the way, your yellow sign is posted on the back side of that swinging gate, so when it...
Because the gate's open about 90% of the time.
Yeah, but it's...
Want it on the other side?
I put it in the planter right in front of that gate there, so at least you look down the driveway, you can see it a little bit better. I think it would be good for people to go and take a look at this. So I don't think we'll let's hold on the tower until people take a look at it at the site. Have you seen it?
No.
You visited the site. It's worth a look. And then we've got some. We had some questions about the existing landscaping around the house. Are you going to bring us more pictures?
Yes.
So can we do a 2-week continuance? Think you can do all this stuff in 2 weeks?
For sure.
I'll entertain a motion for a 2 weeks continuance with those comments. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I just to back up my comment on my question on the driveway, I still think it's a little overpaved, and there's an opportunity for a ribbon or permeable paving where the new driveway is proposed.
Okay, why don't you look into that to see if we can permeable paving or ribbon driveway or a combination of both.
One comment for the architect.
Yes.
If you start looking at the stormwater management, which this project will have to fall under, and you're in a tier 2 or a tier 3, you'll have to do some stormwater stuff, and the permeable paving is the solution, or you have to address the stormwater that comes from it, the runoff.
Can I just see that for a minute? This has some topo on it. You can see that there's quite a bit of drainage this way. In fact, it almost looks like you're starting to create a swale down through here, doesn't it?
There's actually a swale, the city easement swale on the back of the property.
Okay, well, you'll want to take a look at that. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? So ordered. Thank you for coming and speaking to us, and we'll see you people in 2 weeks.
Did you want the
Well, we'll keep all of that, yes. Staff will keep all of that. Okay, item number 2 is 163 La Jolla Drive. This is a proposal for an 810 square foot first floor addition, demolition of a existing 400 square foot attached garage, a new 450 square foot attached garage, complete remodeling for an existing 1,265 square foot one-story single-family residence. The project includes 268 square feet of covered porch at the front and rear, relocating the driveway, abatement of a violation 2007-00125 by permitting the as-built 6-foot wooden fence. And there was a letter from the neighbor, I think, about this fence, wasn't there? That Peter didn't go. There is a letter. Yeah. From the neighbor. Yeah. Okay. The project is located within 50 feet of the edge of the bluff. 23,000 square foot lot, Hillside Design District. Planning Commission approval of coastal development permit and modification to allow alterations within the interior setback are requested. Have you gotten those mods yet?
Christine?
Have you gotten the mod? No. Okay. The proposed total of 2,500 square feet has a 53 FAR. Comments only. Project requires environmental assessment, planning commission approval of the mod, and a coastal development permit. So if you people would give your name for the record.
Okay. I'm Peter Becker. I'm the architect, and Christine Cunningham is in my office, and this is Ron Brawl, who is the owner.
Mr.
Welcome.
Chairman,
Yes.
before we start with the presentation, I want to check with staff about the changes on the plans. Can we work off of these, or should we go off the previous set? Because
Well,
it's only because this is the first time this project has been heard, and usually we have to take off the ones that were at the counter for public comment, public record.
We did send out a public notice for this, and well, I'll hand you this. It shows the changes, but they added 60 square feet, which would change the FAR a tiny bit.
You make the call for us. Should we? I mean, it's insignificant, or?
Yeah, I think it's fine.
Okay, thanks. We'll go off of these.
Okay, we'll look at these plans then. You'd like to give us a brief presentation of what
Okay.
you're proposing?
Well, you can see the footprint of the existing house. We are, right on the ocean, so we have a 75-foot line, and then we have this 50-foot line that we don't want to go beyond without having to go to the planning commission. And so we have concentrated all our remodeling toward the front of the house within the setbacks. This is the modification here because we are altering windows that are in a side yard setback.
Yeah, 6 foot, we used to be 5.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, but our windows are being altered, but the total is actually going to be a little bit less opening. And so I think we've kind of transformed this house from kind of a 50s or 60s sort of ranch thing to something a little bit more like a beachside cottage. That's our intent.
Okay. I think we just approved a project in here. Yes. And this project right here, very handsome house.
Thank you.
Did you do that one?
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, that shingle was beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I mean, you're welcome. Okay, so this is your lot, huh? Anyway, and that's the. So that looks like the existing house right there.
Uh-huh. There's just one big gable going like that.
Yeah.
Another big gable like that.
So now you're going to change the garage over to here. Expand the living room, dining room, kitchen, bedroom. New master bedroom and master bath, okay? This is existing?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, there we go. This is a dormer that just lights the entry.
Yes, that's right.
So you have some volume ceiling there.
Yes. This is the side where we're altering these windows.
Yes.
Right now they're very high aluminum
sliders.
strip windows. Yeah.
And here's the west elevation. Now, how far do these go back in? Those are recessed?
Not really.
Oh, I just see that heavy line.
I know. There's something happened with the printing of this that we're not quite sure of. I apologize for
The
that.
computer. North elevation. Okay. Oh, and this is the fence. Now, this is in conformance with that letter and the neighbor, the neighbor.
Is it Erickson or?
I don't know. There was a letter that I read from a neighbor that she had to negotiate. Yeah, here it is.
That's the red house.
Andy Erickson and Felicia Kashavarov.
Yeah, they're present. They're here.
Oh, they're here. Are you going to speak?
I can if you need me to. I want to.
No, I can't. I can't take your comment from the. Just wait. I'll ask you to speak. You fill out a yellow slip. And fill out one of those yellow slips, and you can speak on the fence. Okay, we'll set that one aside. This is just another set of drawings, right?
Yes.
I think we've got an idea of what you're proposing. You have anything on this, Tony? Any letters at all? Other than that?
Oh, let's see, we have a letter from Paula Westbury. And I think she's in opposition to the project.
Paula Westbury in opposition. Okay, I'm going to open up public comment, and we're going to get this gentleman to come forward. Right here, sir.
Okay.
Sit right down there, speak into the microphone.
I apologize that I didn't look at the fence plan. I think my wife did. Can I just see that?
Yeah,
Do you have
right.
that up
It's
here?
right here.
I think it's what we came up with as a compromise.
This is the as-built, as-modified per agreement with neighbors, and this is as-built. This is the existing fence of 6 feet, right straight across, and now they're tapering the last 12 feet down to 3 feet.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. I agree.
And that's what you wanted to have happen.
Yeah, that's fine. We came to a nice agreement of that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being good neighbor.
Pleasure. Yeah.
Appreciate that. Okay, I see no one else in the audience to come forward to speak to the board, so I'll close the public hearing. It is for the board for your questions and or comments.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Aaron.
The hedge that runs along the fence, is that going to mimic what the fence is doing as well? Okay. Because it says maintained at 6 foot. The hedge.
The 12-foot, it goes straight down.
Yeah, the revised plans actually reflect that the hedge would track the fence.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Are there any questions? These are shingles, I presume, wood shingles, and we don't have a color board or anything like that yet.
No.
The roof is going to be composition shingles. We're going to have stone veneer on the fireplace. These will have shingles, shutters, and double hungs or single hung windows. Glenn? You have a comment?
Nope. I was just curious of the photos because I didn't read in the presentation. So
okay,
but no comments.
No comments. Okay. Yes, you have.
I would like to bring a couple of things to the board's attention.
Okay.
I don't really have any serious problems. I like the architecture. However, I just want to make sure that everybody understands that this property, if you look at the lot, it's the big portion of it is all downhill all the way to the ocean. So the house only has a little flat space, and the proposal, if you're standing on the Douglas Preserve, I just want to make sure that when you look that the public views aren't going to be blocked by this addition.
We have a picture taken from Douglas Preserve.
Okay,
We'd like
let's
to see
take
it.
a look at
Can
that.
we see that?
There's another
This
one.
is from the Douglas Preserve, and this is your house here.
I'm not moving it any more forward because
Yeah,
of the
it'll all be-
75-foot line.
And they're not adding anything onto that part of it.
No, it's going back.
And may I continue?
Yes, you may.
And just so the board's aware that when we get this type of a project, the FAR is really a little bit deceptive because, you know, the lot size isn't really what we're working with. I just want to make sure everybody understands that.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier today. The FAR breaks down really in terms of when these oceanfront lots that are mostly downhill. True. Okay. Gary?
No, I think it's a good project. I'm okay with there's modifications for these windows, I assume.
Well, we're going to have to go to modification hearing officer, but I think we could,
I'm positive
certainly
comments on
an
those.
improvement.
Positive comments on those windows, and I think there's a generous setback from the street. I think the project looks good.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I would
Paul?
agree that the positive comments for the project. We can't take any action on it because it has to go and get the mod approved in the PC, but I would say to reach indefinite continuance back to full board for preliminary and perhaps final, because it is. We should congratulate the owner or recognize that it is a one-story structure that's being put here, and all the work is on the front side of the house, so there's no real significant impact to the ocean view except for the enhancement for the quality of architecture.
Very, very high quality architecture,
Yeah.
and definitely a vast improvement to the neighborhood.
So I see it as a procedural process.
So we would be sending our positive comments to the staff hearing officer that this is a improvement over what's there, and a modification. We would support a modification.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if I may?
Yes.
It looks like there's going to be a large liquid amber tree that's going to have to be demoed to push the house out toward the street.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Yes.
Do we have a picture of that?
Yes. And from the street view, it looks like if that goes, it would be, I would recommend adding another tree or some kind of more landscape to the front of the house.
Do we know where that is here?
It's right.
It's
within the
right.
building, inside
It's in there. It's
Yeah.
in there. It's in the garage. So when you come back, let's have some preliminary landscape plan at least to show.
It's just right here.
Yeah, to show how you're going to replace that. That's going to be important to replace that tree with something that
Is it there?
will be appropriate.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just a comment for the applicant to get the Parks and Recs okay to remove a tree that's in the front yard setback if that's in that zone. And then your landscaping plan will take care of the mitigation of how it's going to be replaced.
I think it probably isn't in the front yard setback.
it's right here.
It's back.
It's further back?
Yeah. But let's show where it is, and then show what you're going to do to keep this cul-de-sac enhanced with a beautiful tree. So that'll be a new. We'll probably want a specimen. Good. Okay. We have any other comments? So we have a motion for a continuance to the staff hearing officer, and I guess it goes on to the PC then for their coastal development permit?
Well, because this is going to the PC anyway, the planning commission will be reviewing the mod at the same time they review the...
So it'll just go to the PC.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be making our recommendations to grant the mod for the window changes and the siding changes, etc. And then it can come back to us for bring back everything, color board, the whole works, details, everything. We might be able to give you final.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if it would be possible for this one to return on the consent calendar after going to PC.
How does the board feel about that? We want to continue this to the consent calendar. I mean, the architecture looks real good, and that way it can just go right on to the consent calendar for final, or preliminary and final. Do you want to see it again?
It may depend on what PC does, but I think that probably.
Well, we have to make a decision what direction we're going to want it to go.
Mr. Chair, I guess I would say to have it returned back to full board just as a procedural process so that the neighborhood knows that we are reviewing projects.
Yeah, I think we better do that. We want to look at the tree and...
It's an important project. We're not worried. Don't be concerned, but it's just something we should be doing.
Okay, so they will continue to the PC for their mod and coastal development permit, and then come back to this board for preliminary approval as a basis for working drawings and possibly finals if there's enough information for us. All in favor say, did we get a second to that? Okay, Denise is second. You made the motion. And it's been seconded by Denise. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Very nice project. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. We're always pleased to see you come in the door.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, now we'll move on to our third project, which is, I guess we can start it right now. It's a little bit early, but that's okay. This is a 233 Las Andes, and it's a revised proposal for remodeling a new 550 square foot second story addition, 173 square foot first story addition. Front entry, second story master bedrooms are revised. Demolition 15 feet of the house. The existing 388 square foot two-car garage is now proposed to remain. The existing 1,870 square foot one-story single-family residence is located on an 8,000 square foot lot in the coastal zone. Staff hearing officer approval is requested to increase the size of an existing window and add windows to the portion of the house in the front setback. The proposal of 2,900 square feet has a 93% FAR. Story poles have been erected. I hope that two people went by and took a look. And have you gotten the mod on this yet?
Yes, we did.
So the mod has been taken care of, and this means that we can take an action on this, right? Yes. Isn't that true, Tony? We can take an action on this, even though the agenda doesn't say that. And if you would give your name for the record.
My name is Paul Zink, and with me is Bank and Janice Johansson. And we know that this is our third time here at the board, and we hope to resolve the issues that are left outstanding.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to make
Thank you for putting the story poles up. That is very helpful. Appreciate that. No problem. Appreciate that.
In our conversations after the last meeting, I kind of was instructing the client that we should either reduce the plate heights or put up story poles. Mm-hmm. What I felt wasn't adequately expressed with my words was the significant setback the second floor has from the street. And it is 55 feet from the front and then the overall ridge. And then the side elevations, we have a 13-foot setback here and a 15-foot setback here. On the south elevation, we have a 10-foot side yard setback. And I know I keep on making reference to the old NPO. It was 1.5 times the setback, which would have been 9 feet, and we're showing 10 feet. But when you got to see the story poles, and I do actually have some pictures. Pardon me one moment. Some pictures of the story poles in place for the people who hadn't had a chance to drive by. This is looking at it straight head on, and then I added the yellow lines from the sticks.
Yeah.
And then this is looking at it from the side yard, and it shows the proximity of the neighbor's two-story house and our two-story house in the existing chimney. And then this is further up the street.
Yeah.
So when we drive through the neighborhood, and we all have driven through the Marine Terrace, we see a lot of strong second-story houses that are 20 feet or 30 feet from the front yard, and they have a different impression to the pedestrian. So that's what I was trying to make clear with the story poles. The change in the design, I'll just be really fast. We did change this roof pitch to 4 and 12. Our existing house is 5 and 12. We kept this gable as 5 and 12 to match the front. Mm-hmm. So when people looking at the front of the house, you'll sense that everything all lines up. No one's going to perceive that this is a 4 and 12. We were able to reduce this ridge by 10 inches. Originally, I had that all across the same. Yeah. And in the story poles it shows, and in the architecture, it adds just a little bit more interest. I want to briefly go over the FAR statistics. The last time I was here, I did not reprint this one. We did make some reductions. So our project is 37% of the FAR, which we are 93% of the allowable. We are now the second largest, where before we were at 39%, so we were the largest house FAR and the largest square footage. Now we're the second largest. When you look at the square footage, we still are the largest house in the 20 closest homes. But like I pointed out the first time we were here, is there are a lot of houses that are under 6,000 square feet. There are 900 square feet with a one-car garage. And the proximity of our neighborhood, this is where our house is. We have San Miguel, and these lots in here come to a point. And so there's a lot of basically substandard lots square footage-wise. So there was, less than
Small.
6,000 square foot lots, 1 story, two bedroom, 1 bath homes, which kind of altered the statistics. What we did in our project, this was what we originally proposed, and this is how we revised it. We made some changes. On the first floor, we tweaked the front entry, which increased our total square footage by 3 square feet. On the second floor, it was a great idea. Someone made a recommendation that we push the second floor back 3 feet. That was a decrease of 138 square feet. And then in the garage, we decided not to do our glorious garage with all the extra bulk storage, and so we kept with the 388 square feet, where before we were at 495. So we reduced the overall project by 242 square feet. So, and I really wasn't very clear on that. I didn't have the statistics on the top of my head. So, and then the other statistic that we try to do is what is our FAR when you look at just the house alone. If you just do the house at 2530 or 2580, we're at an 80% FAR. And that was something we were trying to do on our head. What is just this home, because this garage does not have any impact for the neighborhood. So that's the project at hand. There were a couple questions about the height. I talked about how we reduced the pitch. And then the architectural detailing, I added a detail sheet as well as a landscape sheet today. This is a project that I did in Mission Canyon. I'm following the same details. I made a minor change on the way that this gable is done. I'm setting in this 4x6, 1.5 inches into the plaster, so there's not so much of a shadow line at that point. But what I want to point out is these 4x6 have a plumb cut. There's a 1x4 fascia board on there, and then an OG gutter on that point to create a shadow line. The doors and windows would have this type of detailing, and I have lots of corner windows in this project. It's becoming a theme I've noticed as I go through some old photographs of mine. And we have a color board we put together.
Remember, we had some concerns about the materials and the...
We changed everything to just a straight stucco house. We got rid of all of the wood siding because there was wood siding on the original part of the first floor and there was wood siding on the garage. We now have a 100% stucco house. A discussion was about whether or not to have 2 colors, and we drew a couple things up with 2 color schemes, 2 color schemes, and we decided to stay with 1 color. And that is kind of a peachy color. It matches exactly to the existing color. This looks very yellow, it's just the bright sun, but this is the color swatch of it. We're going to go with a semi-solid wood stain on all the rafter tails, and then the asphalt shingles. We're going with white windows and
white wood trim around.
White with wood trim around, and then we have stone pavers with the Elmer's glue affected. So I guess I want to close with the architecture that we're having shown here and the massing, even though it appears to be, by statistics, 93%. The project does not present to the street a maximum site development that is offensive. And I want to just say that, that this project belongs in the neighborhood, fits in the neighborhood, and will be a nice addition.
Okay, I think we've got it pretty well in mind. Do you have anything on this, Tony?
Mr. Chair, the staff hearing officer approved the mods and did not have any conditions on that approval.
Okay, and we have any letters?
No.
All right, I'll open up public hearing. I see no one in the audience, so I'll close the public hearing, and it is to the board for your questions and or comments.
Mr. Chair.
And we can take an action on this. This could receive a preliminary approval as a basis for working drawings.
Mr. Chair, one question.
Yes.
Paul, do you have any aerial photographs showing the context with the neighbors?
At this point, I don't think so. I know I don't have them here. I don't think I've ever turned any in, so Tony wouldn't have any in the files.
Okay. What is this window here? What is this?
That's the window with the stair tower.
Oh, I see.
And it's just so that you can get it.
So this stairs is up against the wall here, and then this goes back. So that's. And that's what, a west elevation? That's a west elevation.
It is.
Okay. Question, Gary?
Mr. Chair, was there some question, or was there something asked about window in the stair area back here?
Well, that's what I was just
Something
asking about this big window here.
No, I'm at the other side.
Over on the other side here?
The very first time we were here, we had a window on the side.
Yeah, I think you took that
And we
out.
took that out, and we dropped the roof plate a bit.
Okay.
I think that was there was a concern about that being kind of a privacy issue there or something.
There
So
is-
that's out of there now. This window's around to the backyard, the big window.
There is a skylight that happens here, and the skylight will be for venting.
Yeah. And your solar thing works okay on
Yeah.
this roof?
Yeah, it's a skewed angle, but yes, it does work.
Okay. And you've revised this porch and made that a lot more friendly looking.
Actually, I did not revise this porch from the last presentation.
Oh, didn't you?
No. The first
the
time I
first
was here, I had a different solution.
Okay, any questions? All right, then we're ready for comments. If you people are ready, I'm ready to hear your comments.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Is there any overhang over here, or is it?
It's actually flush. It's going to be like, 2 inches, kind of an overhang.
Okay.
It's reflected in those photographs. And there's also an architectural detail, sorry about that. Up here at the top, I'm putting a 1.5 inch blocker, so I'm able to wrap it out a little bit so that this is only a 1 inch overhang versus the 3.5, which I didn't like in the other example. So I'm modifying myself as I get older.
So you have your window details.
Well, because people are always concerned, and this is actually a real sill that's here, and then trim underneath it. And then at the head piece, I note that there's a piece of plywood behind it to make it proud, just a smidgen. And it's kind of shown in this photograph as well as the overhang. This is probably going to be Trex lumber, or it's going to be it's going to be a manufactured wood, so it wouldn't have as much maintenance as real wood.
And these are you going to bump those out a little bit?
The elevation is shown right here, 1/2 inch.
Yeah. Gary, you have some comments?
The window trim looks good. Appreciate that.
Okay.
Chair?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to make
Glenn?
a couple of comments.
Okay.
I went out and looked at the story poles, and nothing raised an alarm looking at the story poles to me. Driving up the road, I saw the neighbors and I saw the additions that have occurred. And the massing on this house, it didn't raise any flags at all to me.
Gonna make the garage bigger now?
You can try. The only issue, and I appreciate the changing of the materials to all stucco and the roof pitch to a 4 to lower the ridge and the detailing. So I think everything's looking good. The only thing that I'm left with is, as this addition 2 stories went to the back of the house, and the major view is, I guess, southwards, is the privacy issue with the neighbor on that side, and just making sure that they don't feel like they're just being looked down upon in their deck. And
Let's
on
look
their,
at the south elevation here for a minute. Now here's
the view looking south. So here's a deck, and here's that open yard right there. So those taller windows will be looking directly at that deck.
That's right here.
And here's sort of a downward shot as well. I don't think the addition is quite that far because here's the line on the wall. But so that was the only concern that kind of came up to me.
I guess my response would be that it's a bedroom and they're not really going to want to be showcasing themselves at that corner window. But I hear what you're saying.
There is do you have a street elevation?
Yes, I do.
Wall that shows the adjacent house.
Can we make a comment?
Yeah.
Here it is.
Does it make a difference if the neighbor's house has a second story looking into our backyard?
It's a factor. There's something there, and we're just concerned both ways. But
There's a, where's your scale? Yeah, 8 scale. We got a separation of about 20 feet between those two houses. And the adjacent house that you're concerned about is a little bit lower. So it's stepped down a little ways. Why don't you, now that you brought that up, let us make our comments now. So what's your determination? Are you find it acceptable or not acceptable? Or that's, this is what we're here for.
One, I just wanted to bring up the issue so that the rest of the board members were aware. And two, wondering if there were any options for raising a sill height, I'm not sure there's a whole lot of area to put any screening, and you don't want to have screening on that side anyway, probably.
I actually thought of that question on my own. If I can go to the floor plan, I'll just come up with an option. And we actually kicked around, and currently I have 2.5-foot windows across this area, so this adds up to 5 feet, and this adds up to 10 feet. And I'm thinking of putting one window here of 3 feet and 3 windows here of 3 feet each, which makes this 9. So I can reduce this by 2 feet, and I can reduce this by 1. And so because what your comment is, we're going this direction. So if I move this over, I'm not changing the architectural theme that I have here with the 3 and the 1 if I go with a 3 foot. And
This is higher, though. These windows are
These
higher.
are extremely higher. These are lower. The interesting thing that I have here is the owner would like to have, and it's not shown here, is 2 steps here. And we would like to raise this up at plus 18 inches. And that's shown as a dotted line. But if I don't, if the owner chooses not to do this, this sill height has to be at 42 inches, which is 3'6", which is what I set it at. So if the owner chooses to put this 18-inch increase, then I have these window sills at 2 feet. So right now, does that make any sense? I can show you on the side elevation. Okay. Right
there
here.
it is.
It's shown at 2 feet, and I show this 18-inch piece. So this right now is at 42 inches.
Will that, if they put that raised platform in there, will that meet code?
Yeah, because it's more than 18 inches, so it'll meet code. The thing too is egress. I have a sliding glass door in the same area, so I don't have to have those 100% openable.
Well, are you going to raise the floor, or aren't you?
The owner would like to raise the floor, yes.
So we're talking about the floor being up here, right?
Correct.
So why don't we put that sill up there and at 42 inches? Actually, I think you can go up to 44, can't you? I mean, you say you already have access out the door.
This will still work over there.
Yeah. You want the window down closer to the floor. So
When you're in the bed and you're able to look down and see the pool, because that's their view.
Is this your pool here?
Yes, that's their pool.
So you're thinking about having one 3-foot window here?
Correct.
And one around the corner.
I would have 3
Yeah.
to carry the theme.
3 here, 3 here.
Correct.
And 1 3-footer there. I think that would be a good. It would be an improvement. Yes.
You want
I think that would help your.
I'm not happy with that.
All right. It's your house. You can say this.
Yeah.
Let me get that.
So, does anybody else have any other comments? Or is this the only thing that? Yes.
I'd like to just put my comments on the record because I'm
Okay,
probably not going to be agreed with. So first of all, I really appreciate all the effort that everybody's making, and I did go look at the story poles, several times. I looked all around the neighborhood.
Click on.
So I just have really two comments about the reasons why I don't support this project. One is when an architect says that the statistics that we're looking at are, oh, they're just 2-bedroom, 1-bath, or they're little cottages, or they're this or that, but that's where the neighborhood started. And if we start looking at the 2-story remodels as what we're comparing with then, our whole guidelines are going to be defeated. So that's one reason. And I think we really have to look at our guidelines on page 21, and we have to remember that projects over 85% of the maximum are generally discouraged. They're generally discouraged, and we've already approved so many of them that the neighborhood is now able to use these projects as the closest home. So that's my other reason, is I think we're really setting a bad precedent, and if we keep going, we're going to end up like Manhattan Beach did. So that's why I say it needs to be reduced.
Thank you. Aaron?
I went by the site today. I'm okay with the massing of the story pools. It's overall a good project. The overhang on the south side of the building would be preferred, I think. So, I mean, the eave overhang. A couple minor comments on landscape.
You'd like to see this overhang out? Is that
These side ones. You mentioned it last time.
This side to come out like we're seeing here.
But they're all consistent, aren't they, Paul? They're going to all
It's the existing house. The existing house has no overhang on the gable ends.
Well, you're trying to.
I'm just mimicking it.
You're trying to be consistent with that.
As far as landscape, you probably don't need to plant the Texas needlegrass in a 5-gallon. Just you can get it in 1 gallon.
Okay.
And and the Santa Barbara daisy, you probably spread that out a little farther. It spreads pretty well. It's planted pretty close together.
Okay. Denise?
Well, I'm not enamored with the second story. There's something about the massing of it that's not working very well for me. I don't get the little round window. And I just, overall, I suppose one of the things that I've always had in my mind about additions was that once done, they should look like they were always there, and for me, this looks like an addition. I just don't see it as holding together and not looking like an addition on top. It could be the windows, the difference in the windows from upper story to up here to here. They're triples here, and they're just double down there. Anyway, that this fireplace doesn't need to be higher, but I find the front elevation very awkward because of the really low fireplace in proportion with the rest of it. I think it may be a little heavy-handed on the upper story. Could be a little less bulky than that. Perhaps not come all the way to the end and be so flat on that end. It's just something about that shape at the end that looks like the house got cut off to me, and I can't get past it. Anyway, those are my comments.
Okay. Glenn, do you have any other comments to make? How do you Where are you coming down on this?
Well, I already commented about the scale and the square footage and the height. Just kind of following up on Denise's comments, I think when you made that comment, I kind of looked at these windows, and they do seem a little bit different than what the front is, and I'm not sure significantly what the view is out that way, but you might have a pretty good view, I don't know. But it just seems like there's a lot of windows for the character of the original house. That would be my comment.
Gary?
First off, I'd like to say that I'm okay with the massing. I'm okay with the second-story addition. It looks good. I appreciate the entryway and the way he turned it out, and I appreciate the details on the windows. I am missing the wood that was on it. Now, I did not like the wood on the understory because it was backwards. I don't like stucco and wood on top. But now, what's happened with it completely stuccoed is, to put it in Paul's words, we've taken some of the cutesiness out of it. And I think the cutesiness. And what I see from it is there's a little bit of character missing from it, and it's a little plain, and it's monotoned in color. The fenestration, I would agree with the board that the fenestration is not equivalent. He got a modification for this window, but it's in the largest portion of plaster in the entire front facade. There's just that one little window, and then as we get upstairs, in this small little room, in this small little sitting room, there's a big, huge window, and then we've got a wraparound window here. So I think there's a proportion problem with the windows. And as Mark Winke would say, that's a good thing. These are little tiny little things that can be changed. I think the overall project is there. The size, bulk, and scale I'm completely happy with. The roof pitches I'm happy with. Personally, I would have liked overhangs on them. I mentioned that last time, but I'm still okay with it being flat. I can see the architectural element of it between the existing and the new. So that's not a deal breaker for me, but I would like to see a little more character.
But you find the size, bulk, and scale acceptable?
Absolutely.
And Glenn, how many people find the size, bulk, and scale acceptable? Okay, so I think we've got we're going to have, that's going to be acceptable. I think what I hear is a lot of fussing of different little things. I agree that there's inconsistency between the windows on the first floor and on the second floor, and I think that's not working. That there needs to be that consistency. I think that the comments that maybe that you're going to change this and you're going to change that, that needs to be done. What about this idea of that it's too much stucco, that the wood on the second floor would be better, would be lighter, would be more interesting? Or does anybody else go along with that? Or is that just Gary's feeling? He wants it to be more cutesy. And
I think the house definitely needs some character, and it could help in that respect. That's it.
So can is there support for preliminary approval as a basis for working drawings on this, with this to return in progress, with the architect to have studied the proportions of the window, the composition of the window, to bring it more into consistency with the first floor, and maybe give some consideration to a secondary material on the upper level to lighten it up a little bit, to make it more interesting. It was one of the bigger houses in the neighborhood, and I mean to comment on Bernie's comments, and I appreciate your comments, Bernie, and your concern about the creeping growth of these neighborhoods. I think when the house is over 85%, and it's one of the biggest houses in the neighborhood, we have to have a very, very special a piece of architecture to feel right about that. So, but would the board entertain a motion for a preliminary approval as a basis for working drawings to return in progress with further studies on these particular issues, the composition and study of the size and the proportions of the windows, giving another look at an alternate material on the second floor, and what else? What other? Is that about it?
Did you have any comments on the bedroom windows looking toward the neighbor?
I think we've already the architect has already told us that he was willing to change these to 1 and 3 around on the other side, or maybe there's some other a combination that you would like to show us. I think we want to see what you're thinking, rather than just say, well, that might be okay, 1 and 3. We're gonna these. And how are these going to be? You got another corner window here. It may be that that 2 and 2 is better than 1 and 3. I don't think we can verbalize this kind of stuff. You've got to draw it and study it and see what comes out best.
Can I have my client make some comments?
You may.
Or do you want to, or shall?
Yeah, sure. I'd like to make a comment on the window and the. But I don't agree with Paul. Is that I'm not after looking into my neighbor's backyard. It's the first point. I'm after looking out over the views down towards the ocean and the beach. The bedroom. The bed in the bedroom will be towards the east here, right? So we will look out through these windows. Making them smaller would then cut off the view that we would have from the bed in the bedroom. So yeah, I'm not at all interested in that.
Well,
as far as changing the under windows on the top, what do we have on the front here? We can make them 2 and 2 and 2.
We can even eliminate that.
And we can get rid of the porthole there, yeah.
well, I think that what we're talking about here is a study of the proportions of things. They are very important, and there's all I can say is looking at the lower floor and then the upper floor, there seems to me to be an inconsistency that the architecture up here doesn't quite match what's down here, and somehow that has to be resolved. I don't think we can design it here at the table. It has to be. I think the best thing that we could do is take a vote on whether or not this can receive a preliminary approval or not. And if it doesn't, then we've got a different kind of a problem in front of us. And if it does, then you can make some further studies and come back to us when you think you've got it. What will be acceptable to the board? I understand you want it to be acceptable to your client, but it also has to be acceptable to the board. So we're a team working together here. We both have to be happy, or we can deny it. I don't think you want to denial on the basis of some windows.
Actually, I told the client that I wouldn't mind taking a denial to the city council because I felt like we had a fairly strong project and that the requests being made by the board were minor in nature. And I go back to the point that this house, if we look at just the structure, is an 80 FAR. When you look at the detached garage in the back, we hit 93%. But the requirements that are being placed upon the applicant, we've done a lot of massaging and changing to the architecture, but we're creating a certain style, and yes, the upper windows and the lower windows might not have 100% of a jive, but overall it's an enhancement.
I think this project's come a long ways, and I appreciate your work on it. I hope that you don't want to go to City Council over these details when they really should be worked out here. City Council's not the person to to work out details of window proportions, and I think we are more qualified to do that than they are. So I hope that you don't want to do that, but I think that we have to entertain some kind of emotion so we can move one way or another here. So I will entertain some kind of emotion from the board.
Mr. Chairman, you make one comment?
If you will follow it up with emotion.
Well, I think that the biggest,
comment?
I just want to say that the biggest issue for me is the feeling that should be more congruous, the whole design, and that speaking of character, I mean, simple as that is, the person that you're looking at across the street, that home has a lot of character, and it's a very set character to it, and it's not fancy and it's not like anything over the top, but it has its place, and it's also within neighborhood compatibility if you look at it from that respect. It's
right. No, I agree, and I think that we need to move this along one way or another. So I'm still looking for a motion from somebody.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to see it come there
to the board with the changes.
Do you want? But can we give it a preliminary approval as a basis for working drawings? I mean, it's essentially. I've got four hands that this is the size, bulk, and scale is acceptable. What we're talking about now is architecture that's compatible with the neighborhood and high quality.
Okay, I'll make that motion.
Okay, is there a second? There's a second. There's been a motion made as a preliminary approval as a basis for working drawings, with the applicant to return in progress with these further studies.
With the studies that we mentioned?
Yes.
Yeah, I would second that motion.
Okay. What we're understanding is that we would like the proportion and the consistency of the windows on the second floor, which is the new addition, to be more consistent with the windows that you're proposing on the first floor, and give some consideration to a different material that may not work out. I can see that it may not work out, but it might be something that would lend additional character and charm to the house. And because this is one of the bigger houses in the neighborhood, we want it to be just absolutely top notch. And that's your task.
Paul, there's some use of brick, maybe some use of brick on the.
You mean I can add some brick like a wainscot at the front door?
Something. There's something that you can do.
Is that what we took off? Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. That's what we took off from the beginning. Okay.
Yeah, well, we don't want to get into too many materials. I think one of the problems before was that there were too many materials, and so you've gone, in the other direction to one material. It is a big house, Paul, and it might really be benefited by a different material on a lighter material on the second floor, and possibly a different color then too.
The vinyl siding is lighter material.
Is there any other comments on the motion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, there's 2 in opposition, and 1, 2, 4. What? I'm voting for the motion. Yeah, I'm voting for the motion. And I would say that we have to make the neighborhood findings of for this, size, bulk, and scale is acceptable, right? You made the motion.
Yeah.
Size, bulk, and scale. Now, high quality of materials and compatibility with the neighborhood. I think we're still working on those a little bit.
Yeah, well, that's what.
But we want to. I want to move it forward because you've been here 3 times, and I think you have cooperated, and I think there's been a lot of progress. And you did put up the story poles out of your own volition. I appreciate that. I didn't see any resistance from the neighborhood here, so we want to move it forward. And Bernie, I will say that there is, and this is something, Tony, for the neighborhood preservation ordinance update too, there is a difference when the garage is not attached to the house in terms of the mass.
Mr. Chair, I understand that. However, if we're trying to have open spaces left in any of these neighborhoods, it's still covered by the garage. There's a tiny bit of a pool and no really open space. So that's how I see it.
I understand. But there is quite a bit of open space yet still in the it's not that because of the second story, if they were trying to do all of this on in one story, and they were coming back here and connecting into that garage in one story, it wouldn't even be coming to us, and they would be gobbling up all of their space.
Sure, I understand, and I really do appreciate it. It has come a long way, and I'm just, I don't have trouble with this project. I'm just thinking about the neighborhood and what's going to come next and what kind of a stage we're setting. That's all.
Yeah, I agree.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Did you want to say anything? You're done.
I know I don't.
Count to 10 first.
Thank you.
Okay, so you have your marching orders, and this is you put yourself back on the agenda when you're ready to show us something. Hopefully we can send it on to the consent calendar.
Move on with the garage? Or do we have to?
The question my client was asking is, we want to pull a separate building permit to make modifications to the garage while we're doing the working drawings for this repairs. Yeah, and I need to get final, and so we still can't do anything here until we get final on the entire concept, and then I'll pull 2 building permits, one for each structure.
Well, you'll be back in a couple of weeks,
Yes,
and
we
we
will.
can get final maybe.
And
Okay.
it'll just be for the windows, or are they going to find
Windows and exterior siding for the finish of the second
windows
floor.
and exterior siding.
Details.
And the landscaping is okay.
Or can they just?
Irrigation,
Hopefully.
Paul, some irrigation stuff.
Irrigation
Okay,
plan.
thank you very much for your patience. We understand this is very, very painful and difficult, but I really think it's better to work these things out here than at City Council. This is,
Mr. Chair?
yes.
Tony pointed out that we really can't make the findings. And looking at the MPO guidelines, it's kind of apparent that we can't make the findings. So I think an indefinite continuance. And we can give him the understanding that this is how the board feels, but that we only are looking for
read the
these
findings.
changes.
You've got to make these findings, Denise.
No, and I can't. That's why I stopped after the bulk and scale, because I don't.
You mean the quality architecture materials, the development includes proposed structure and grading is designed with quality architectural details and quality materials, proposed materials and colors will maintain the natural appearance. Well, that's of the ridgeline or hillside, so...
I could make the details on he does have the window details, and I believe that
the
is
proposed
quality.
development will be consistent with the scenic character of the city and will enhance the appearance of the neighborhood.
I can't make that.
Compatibility, the proposed development will be compatible with the neighborhood and its size, bulk, and scale will be appropriate to the site and the neighborhood. Yes?
When you make a preliminary approval, you have to make the NPO findings, and we kind of got hung up there when we were adding the NPO findings to the motion. But you voted on the motion before.
Well, we're
adding
going to have
the
to
NPO
withdraw
findings.
that motion. We either somebody else will make the motion that feels they can make those findings, or we will have to continue it with the but with the same sense of direction. It's just that we can't make the findings yet until we see these windows proportions, the materials, and that kind of stuff.
Right. I think that's the issue, is that it's hard to make the findings for neighborhood compatibility when, in fact, I don't find it to be compatible with the neighborhood yet.
Okay. So we're going to have to withdraw that motion and make a motion. Then you're going to make a motion for a 2 weeks. You think you can do this in 2 weeks?
A 2 week continuance.
For the applicant to study exactly the same thing.
The same thing.
Yeah.
Hmm?
Yeah, because
Yeah, well, you can discuss it. And who seconded that motion?
Something in writing on that?
Can you second that alternative motion? 2 weeks continuance.
And then just to clarify the motion, that the two items, actually be three items that we're addressing that would be in the motion, would be the corner window here is that we are to study alternatives. We are to study the window proportions of the second story that face the street east. And then we are to study exterior building material for the second floor to add some.
I would include it so that it's all the windows facing the street, including the one on the first floor, because they can be made bigger, right? To match the ones on the second floor.
So we could make this a three-bank window to match the three-bank windows on the upper floor.
I actually think that wouldn't be a bad idea.
What? Well, we don't. My feeling is that window proportions are something you have to draw and look at and decide what is the best. We can't guess. You know whether.
I just don't want to limit it to the second story windows.
Yeah. The thing that I feel is that, you know, if you take these three down here and then you're going to put three over here, you know, this thing is going to get very windowy, and that might not be acceptable either. So we can't.
I think you just study.
Then what do you going? Then this thing goes all around. You know, it's like once you start something like that, then it's not consistent around the sides and so on and so forth. So I think the direction is we need to study and have the consistency in the windows, and that doesn't necessarily mean that 3 is the magic number, you know, necessarily, because consistency means consistency on all 4 elevations. And remember, you have to. We're trying to keep this in character with the neighborhood. So you know, when I'm looking at this here,
Mr. Chair?
Yes, the house across the street.
In the same vein that we just talked about the second floor windows and the first floor windows, I personally would be open to different materials on the first floor as well.
Like wood?
Like what I wanted to begin with, yes.
What was that?
I said it would. I thought it would be much cuter if it was just an all wood house. But it's an option.
I guess that, unfortunately, you have to understand my client's perspective on the mixed messages and coming up with a solution to sort of satisfy a majority of the people, or what I would feel is like moving forward. And it's just kind of.
I've been consistent.
Well, I know.
I think the last rendition that you had stucco on top and wood on bottom.
Yeah.
And
people felt that was backwards.
We said study the proportions of that, and you moved to all stucco, which is okay, but there was a lot of character that was removed with that. So I just think that you need to study adding some character. Now, whether it's adding some like different materials down below, or adding different materials on top, or that type of thing, you're the architect. You know what to do. You know what we mean when we say it's lacking character, and you know how to go there.
When the board has a whole bunch of different opinions, what that means is the design hasn't arrived yet. And so they're all searching for one thing or another. You shouldn't necessarily listen to this opinion or that opinion, because everybody's just searching and they're all grasping at straws. The design hasn't arrived yet, and it's just not there. And so you need to pull it together. And so the motion now is for a 2 weeks continuance with the same comments, though, as you understand. And all in favor say aye. And you all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, so we What did we do, pick up one vote?
I changed because I didn't hear the language of the side windows in the last.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, client?
Yeah, so can we summarize what the points are now? Because I'm a little bit confused.
And we'll be limited to that the next time around.
There's really 3 points, which was the corner window at the master bedroom to study. It's the window cohesiveness on all 4 elevations, and it was to study the architectural character and detailing.
Right, and that third one is the most important thing. So this house, everybody looks at it and they say, wow, we really like
And
it.
whether it's wood siding or wood shingles or vertical board and bat, that's incidental. It's just provides some relief, character, cute.
That's it.
And we'll be limited to that.
And then, like Janice was saying, we're going to be limited to that as part of the discussion. And that, oh, by the way, now can we talk about another? Well, the color's part of that same thing, but she doesn't want us to open up another can of worms about some other area on the
I
property.
think the massing has been decided.
The massing and the
Size,
overall
bulk, and
height.
scale is all, that's decided. We agree that, the majority of people agree that that's acceptable. And I think that what sold that was the story poles, so I really appreciate your putting those up.
Thank you.
Okay.
Wasn't that in the motion that was withdrawn, though?
No, it's not. It's in the new motion.
The size, bulk, and scale?
We've continued it for 2 weeks for you to study these 3 things. We've already agreed that the size, bulk, and scale is acceptable.
We could put that in. Would you agree to put that in the motion?
Put that in the motion. Size, bulk, and scale is acceptable.
And we can take story poles down.
Yes, you can take the story poles.
All right.
What a wind is going to take them down.
Thank you very
I
much.
was so glad that they stayed up last weekend.
Thank you for your patience. Seeing nothing else on our agenda, we will stand adjourned.